You're tuned in to Horror Slop, where the stories are rotting, truth is twisted, and sleep, forget about it.
Yeah, welcome to the pit. It's gross, it's creepy, and honestly, it's kind of my vibe. Hope you like nightmares, because tonight's tale, it slithers.
Straight from the darkest corners of Reddit. Real stories, real fear, and just enough blood to stain your soul.
So at least grab your bed sheets, so grab a flashlight, and maybe a therapist.
This is Horror Slop. And now the first descent. One story to open the night. Just enough to crack the door and let something in.
Nasleep has been hiding a terrible secret, and I just figured it out, by SWMN. To put it simply, I loved scrolling through this subreddit. At first, I never really gave any thought to the posts I read, but in time, I started thinking long and hard about every single one I would read. I started to understand them more than I ever did, and I fully realized what Nasleep is. Nasleep is a chronicle of dark events and nightmares. It's full of warnings, written accounts from those of us who have witnessed the unspeakable and desperately want to warn the world before it happens to them as well. I've devoted most of my free time to proving that, to hunting down proof and records of the events we read about. But I never expected that proof to find me first. Ben doesn't believe. He's living in blissful ignorance as he fools himself and fools others. He likes to pretend that his boring, monotonous existence is all that there is. Ben doesn't want to believe that there's something else, something out there that's more than him. He doesn't want to believe in God. He doesn't want to believe in demons. But believing or not believing doesn't make a difference to the truth, it only means that you're either in acceptance or denial. Ben lives in Cleveland, Ohio, and he's failed in every single way possible. He tries to bury his emptiness by immersing himself in fiction, in books, in games, in shows, but even that's not helping anymore. He doesn't want to believe anything. He doesn't want to believe that every day is another day closer to his inevitable death, unless he changes his mind and starts to believe. Something about that post unnerved me more than anything else I read that day. Maybe because of how short it was or because of the odd style in which it was written, void of almost any details. Maybe it was because of how my own name was Ben and that I lived in Cleveland too, and that it was a pretty freaky coincidence. But that was all it was. A weird coincidence. I mean, it couldn't possibly be about me. Who would want to post about me? I'm perfectly normal and perfectly sane. I didn't even think about the whole incident until 2 days later. Why is Ben still awake? It's almost midnight, were the first lines, and I froze. It was almost midnight my time. My name was Ben. And after that last post, was this really somehow about me? I shrugged it off. Coincidence was all it was. Strange, freaky, really improbable coincidence. I kept reading. I suddenly switched my phone off and threw it across the room in a burst of anger. This was going too far. Whoever was playing this practical joke, using my real name was one step too far. And exposing those things online, was just wrong. But with a start, I suddenly realized the gravity of those words. No one from school knew about my crush on Grace. And no one, not even my family, knew about Sienna. She had been one of my closest friends, someone I had met online, and she had killed herself in my freshman year. For the last 3 years, I held myself responsible for her death because I hadn't been home the day it happened, and she had tried to call me that day. How would someone know about that? Why would someone know about that? Or more importantly, why would someone or something post about me here? I couldn't understand it. What was to gain? What was the point of all of it? And who, or what, the hell was doing all this to me? I fell asleep that night thinking over and over about that post. When I woke up, the first thing I did was log on to Reddit so I could report the post and message the mods about it. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach when I searched for it and found that the post had been deleted. And not just the post, but the first one from 2 days before was gone too. As were the accounts u/Coricomo and u/3462937black8. They had all been deleted without a trace, and I was left with nothing. I still sent a message to the mods, but what could I say? That I thought some crazy cyberstalker was posting random things about me on a subreddit meant for paranormal experiences? Sure, I had copied the text of the posts by screenshot the night before, but if the accounts were already gone, they couldn't do anything about it. Needless to say, I didn't much enjoy that Thanksgiving. I felt like my privacy had been violated horribly. The entire next 2 days, I kept looking over my shoulder and out the windows. Even after my brother left to go back to college, I never caught a glimpse of anything unusual. But someone, somehow, had found out things about me. I almost said something to my brother about it, but I knew he'd just laugh at me. He was someone who refused to see the truth about the sides of the world that were hard to believe, and so I kept quiet in my growing fear. Needless to say, I didn't log onto Reddit for a few days. I froze in my chair as the page refreshed, displaying the first 4 post titles, all from different accounts. Ben is a coward, Ben still doesn't believe, it's coming for Ben, and the last one, Ben, you're too late. Don't run. Don't hide. My mouth went dry, and my mind went blank. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think straight. I've never had one before, but I'm pretty sure I was in the middle of a panic attack. As I read that last sentence, I felt the panic stir in my stomach and rise up, catching in my throat and stopping my breathing. Had my dad not come back yet? Was that why he wasn't home? I wanted to just dismiss the idea as foolish, as a joke, but I couldn't. I couldn't run from this like I ran from everything else. The information that these posts had contained, the details about me, about Sienna, about where my dad worked. I was starting to realize this was something far worse than a joke or even a stalker's posts. I didn't want to read any more of the post, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. Everything here, every creature, every death, every account, can be used by them. Have you ever wondered why so many of us escape our brushes with death and things that, by all accounts, should have killed us? It's because they want us to live. They want someone to write about it, to post it out there, so the creatures can feed even more. I don't know if they live off of our fear or if they literally live off of us, but the creatures of Nosleep live because we immortalize them on the internet forever. Every survivor writes out their transcript and sends it out for the world to see, but they also reveal their account to the mods. Have you ever wondered why this group of shadowy chaperones hold such strict rules and regulations for Nosleep? It's because they're the culprits too. They mold the accounts of others into the perfect format to cause fear, and then they go and erase all the evidence that they can find. That's why I could never find a shred of proof. It was all erased on purpose. And somehow, something was trying to warn me about that. Maybe it was one of the mods who got tired of leading the readers to their deaths, I don't know. All I know is that if I listened to their warnings, my father would still be alive. It's already in Ben's house. He's too late. I could feel my heartbeat racing as I opened the post quickly, but there was no post to greet me. There was only one word. Hide. I've been up here in my room with the door locked, hiding in the closet for almost 2 hours now. After the first hour, I heard the front door open, followed by my mom calling out for me. I frantically tried to dial her phone to warn her, but before I could, I heard her ear-splitting scream tear through the silence of the house. Then there were no more sounds, and when I tried her phone, no one picked up. Stay away from r/Nosleep. Everything you read about here can come for you at any time, any place, any day. I don't think every story is used by them to get to us, but the possibility is out there. The creature that killed my family is one of them, and I don't know how many more are out there that the mods are helping. If you think something from the posts here are following you, don't ignore it. And whatever you do, don't ever fall asleep. Stay awake. Stay alert. They're out there. They've always been out there. And they've always known we've been watching them.
You feel that? That weird pressure in the room? Yeah. That's the algorithm. It knows you're watching, and it gets real cranky when you don't feed it. A simple ritual helps. Click the little thumbs up, tap subscribe, say its name 3 times into your phone mic. Kidding, probably.
Engagement appeases the darkness. You know what to do.
Good, human. Now, back to the horror.
I learned early on that little memories are the ones that mean the most. Simple things. Sunday afternoons at the craft store with my mother, wandering air-conditioned aisles prematurely filled with Halloween decorations. Sunset drives to the grocery store where I struggled to absorb every detail of the fiery sky. Constructing driftwood castles on the beach, pleasantly aware of my sunburn and wind-tangled hair. Desert sunrises, sprinklers in summer. Craft time in the cluttered family room, dog kisses, cat cuddles. Tree branches casting shadows upon moonlit snow. Rereading my favorite book while night insects sing and evening deepens to true night. They are horrors. Parents are the only ones who remember these children with love. We remember bedtimes and bath times and what it is like to read to babies who cannot hear or see or think. We remember the interminable days in the hospital, and we remember the good days with something approaching religious rapture. Our children cannot remember these things, but we remember them for them. We are their memory keepers. In this way, we live for them. We keep them alive, if only in our hearts. But that isn't enough of a life, it isn't enough memory. So I told my daughter my memories, and I hoped that somewhere in her malformed brain, they would take root and grow in ways we don't yet understand. I hoped that somehow she would be able to live my memories, borrow my life and live it, all inside her head. When I decided to go through with the pregnancy, some people told me I was brave. Others told me I was stupid. I felt neither brave or stupid. Mostly, I felt annoyed and selfish. I knew early on that she would be born disabled and deformed, but she was all I had left of my husband. If there was even a sliver of a chance that she would survive, I needed to try. The mere knowledge that she existed made me so happy. Of course, I second-guessed my decision when she was born. She looked nightmarish. Not even human. Like the jump scare photos I used to email to my friends back in junior high. How, I thought, how can someone look like this and not feel pain? What have I done? My daughter died at 18 months. Nobody was sad but me. You gave her a good life, they said. You showed her love, which is something a lot of people wouldn't do. It's a terrible thing. Terrible. But at the same time, well, it's got to be a little bit of a relief, doesn't it? Burning was annihilation. I knew this was not rational. But my daughter spent her short life deformed, on the receiving end of revulsion and fear. I felt like cremating her, obliterating her physical form, would be akin to agreement. A final statement to the effect of, you were wrong to be born like this. You were wrong to make the world look at you. We will fix that now. When she was first born, one of my greatest fears was that she would have cognition, that she would have enough awareness to know that she was ugly. She had died without that knowledge. I wanted her to be dead without it, too. It makes no sense. I knew that. But even so, I paid for full honors, a shiny white coffin, a mortician to paint her, a flower-choked viewing room to present her, and a plot in the cemetery just over the tree-choked hill, a mere 15-minute walk from my front door. It was the only way I could prove to the world that my daughter was a beautiful blessing to me, and that she made me happy. The night after the burial, I took 4 sleeping pills and dreamed of my daughter. She was in her frozen casket, quivering as 6 feet of impossibly heavy earth pressed down on the fragile wood. It was cold, damp, and horribly dark. Somewhere beyond the confines her coffin, worms squirmed and insects chittered, planning how to breach her coffin and consume her remains. The light swept away. A flashlight, I realized. And holding the flashlight, a woman. In stark contrast to his acceptance was the little girl who lived down the road. She came several days in a row to ogle through the fence, watching my baby with sick fascination. Once I called to her, "Hi, sweetie. What's your name?" My heart lurched. That isn't kind to say. So. It's still a scary baby. Then she burst into tears and ran away. I never saw her again. I worry about her sometimes. So small, probably not even 5, and wandering the boonies without anyone to watch her. And in that moment, as I lay crumpled around my rocking chair, those memories crushed me. There were too many to hold, too many to keep. I lost control of them, and they ate me alive. I held on to the rocking chair as if to a life raft and wept for hours. Why? I asked. I found a friend who needs them, but I can't remember how to share them. I am her memory keeper, so I told her everything: tree shadows on moonlit snow, sun-glittering waves creeping toward a driftwood castle, bounding puppies and adventurous cats, vibrant sunsets and snowy afternoons in the pizza parlor. "Where are you going?" I asked. I woke after dark, disoriented and terrified. I could still feel the wet worms inching over my face. Grief overtook me. Memories broke their bounds and ate me once again. Glittering tides, austere hospital rooms, lightning storms and cats and craft stores. I sobbed and paced and collapsed and eventually crawled. Sometime later, I found myself under my kitchen table. I curled up and stared at the tile until the thick golden light of sunrise spilled across it like syrup. Another night gone. I didn't know if that was a blessing or a curse. So instead of sleeping, I stayed awake so long that I started seeing things. Minor at first, ladybugs and doves and a well-loved teddy bear with a threadbare nose, a missing eye and the name Bailey stitched on its belly. I found myself running helplessly through a raging lightning storm, dodging lightning strikes and ominous shadows between the trees. I clung to an overturned driftwood castle as the tide propelled it into the open sea. Dogs whined and cats yowled. My favorite book caught fire in my hands while the teddy bear shook its head and sobbed. And somewhere in the distance, a child wept. After a while, a wet, garbled hiss cut through the weeping. "I can't," the child whispered. "A girl," I thought, "a little girl with a sore throat. I told you already. No one knows I'm here." The wet gobbling came again. It made my hair stand on end. It sounded like a monster. A slithering monstrosity that crept through your walls while you slept. "She'll just hate me." The girl uttered a hoarse sob. "Because I screamed at you." Rotten and limp, tiny hands and feet curled and withered so that they looked like chicken feet. But there was no mistaking her, her dear, familiar, deformed head, her distinctive little body. It was her. She was here. And she was talking. That's because she isn't a real mother. My mother is a real one. My baby's lips moved. Her wet, clouded eyes rolled in the girl's direction, then in mine. "She's looking at us now." "No," my daughter said. "She's alive. But she gave me all her memories, so her memories are mine." My daughter persisted, and I told you all the memories, too. That means we're all sort of the same person now. That's why she can see us. The little girl's lip quivered. Her face was badly swollen. Puffy ligature marks snaked around her neck. Tears leaked from her bruised eyes and dripped down her crooked nose. She won't like me. I'm not like you. I'm bad. I'm very bad, my baby assured her. The girl gingerly wiped her face, wincing as she touched swollen flesh. You're not bad. Just scary. She smiled weakly. Scary baby. I blinked. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my daughter's coffin. And she was in my arms, soft and somehow pulpy, like a rotted fruit. It was so terribly cold, I could barely breathe. Do you remember her? My daughter asked. Even though it was dark, I could see her. Discolored lips and flickering tongue formed the words flawlessly. She used to come and stare at me, because she knew I was a monster. Bad. My daughter's hands pressed against my skin, pushing like a nursing kitten. I was always bad. But they never burned me. They only ever drowned me. Her little fists moved faster, pushed deeper. They dropped me into wells and rivers. Faster and faster, so hard it was painful, a volley of tiny punches. I hate it here. I only find sad friends, and I have to make them happy. But I never make them happy, because I never have enough time. You made me happy, I said. You made me happy, I repeated. Then I was in a rusty box, a freezer, watching a grinning woman empty jars of bugs across the threshold. Cockroaches and spiders and crickets, a glistening cascade. I hated it. I was afraid of the tiny, hard space, and more than anything I was afraid of the bugs. Then I was in a bathtub, clean and glistening white. Someone grabbed my head and dunked me under, holding me until I helplessly sucked lungfuls of water. Then my quivering legs gave out and I tumbled down again. My feet hurt, I realized, they felt open. As my vision gave out, I saw that the wall ahead of me was covered in faint, bloody footprints. I'd done this so often that the soles of my feet were raw. I woke up crying. It was a teddy bear. A mud-encrusted teddy bear with a missing eye and the name Bailey stitched into its belly. I slept badly that night. At some point I realized I was curled on my side, crying. I didn't remember waking up. I only knew I wasn't asleep anymore. I rolled over. Horror exploded in my heart as cold, wet silk and squirming worms pressed against my face. I screamed and tried to sit up. The lid of my daughter's coffin hit my head and knocked me back. I wish you'd burned me, my daughter said mournfully. Bugs crawled across my shoulder and spun up over my daughter's face. I tried to ignore them. I couldn't give in to panic. If I did, I might never escape. I can't help my friend. She's about to die. But I don't want her to die. If she dies, I have to come back in a body that can't live. She uttered a sob. I have to hurt again. And again and again and again and again. I licked my lips. The tip of my tongue touched a worm. It took everything in me not to scream. Where does she live? I don't know. What's her name? I don't know. What do you mean? I don't know. I don't remember names. I don't even know mine. She has no paper. My daughter looked at me miserably, with a kind of bleak malice I could barely comprehend. Do I make you happy? Yes. I unraveled it and blinked tiredly, struggling to make sense of the crooked letters written upon it. They were stiff and reddish-brown. The girl had written this in her own blood. Of course, I'd given her something to write on, but nothing to write with. How had I been so stupid? Scary baby says you will help me. All her memories belong to you. They have already helped me, so I hope you will help me too. I am Kaylee. I do not know my last name. I had a sister named Bailey buried in my yard. My house is by yours. It is yellow, with a red van and purple flowers. I got cut open. I am sorry for saying your baby looked scary. She is my best friend now, but I hurt her feelings when I said that. I am very sorry. Please help me now. I called the police. By way of explanation, I lied and told them I'd heard an altercation. When I looked out my window, I saw a bloodied little girl running into the yard. Before I could check on her, a man dragged her back inside. Just a few minutes later, sirens blazed their way up the road, cops, ambulances, fire trucks. The ambulance left quickly, but the rest remained for many hours. By the time a cop came to talk to me, it was already morning. He looked exhausted and sick. "Ma'am," he said. "Please sit down." I sat. He looked out the window, toward my neighbor's house. He had puffy red bags under his eyes. Tears dribbled down and caught in the creases. He wiped them quickly. "Your daughter died recently, didn't she?" His face twisted. He covered his mouth and nodded. "We found her body next door." He gestured helplessly. "The little girl next door had your daughter's body. We don't know how yet. But when we found her, she was holding it. Her. Like why your daughter was a doll." The cop explained everything with agonizing slowness. It turned out one of the responding deputies was a member of my church, and he immediately recognized my daughter's distinctive body. They dispatched units to the cemetery. My daughter's grave appeared undisturbed, but someone had made a small tunnel near the grave marker. They bored a hole in her casket and stolen her. The girl's name was Kaylee. She was comatose by the time the police responded. The case made the local papers, but didn't travel beyond the borders of our county. I was surprised for a little while. Then I looked up crime statistics, and realized the vast majority of crimes against children, kidnapping, abuse, murder, never get attention. On the day my daughter burned, Kaylee woke up. Several weeks later, I received a call from her caseworker. "She'd like to meet you," he said. If you're able." The girl cut a pathetic scene, tiny and somehow shriveled, with the unmistakable slackness of someone who's been unconscious for a very long time. She was on crutches, and several of her fingers were missing. The caseworker settled her onto my sofa, then drifted into the kitchen to give us a semblance of privacy. Once he was out of sight, the girl smiled shyly. "I'm glad I get to see you again." There was something familiar in her voice. Underneath the chirpy excitement was something else, a wet sort of raspiness that made me think of frozen coffins and rotten white silk. "So am I," I said. I nodded as tears brimmed and fell. "And she makes me very happy."
You're still tuned to Horror Slop. Frequency unknown. Stories endless. Let's spin the next nightmare.
I work at an amusement park where only half of the actors are actual actors. The car ride was kind of relaxing, compared to the events that had led up to it. After a while of sitting in the car, however, my back brushing against the seat, I felt a familiar sticky sensation on my skin. I had been wearing a loose, thick shirt, so I hadn't noticed right away that I had started to bleed again. Also, the journey into the underground had kept my mind fully occupied, so maybe I just hadn't paid any attention to fleeting discomfort. Now that I was leaning against the backrest, the fabric rubbing against my skin, I finally noticed the dampness. "Sorry, could you pull over for just a second?" I begged my coworker. Darius nodded and parked near the side of the road. Madeline, who had so far been staring out of the window from the back seat with wide, attentive eyes, perked up and tilted her head at me. "What is it?" she asked. I wordlessly wrangled off my shirt. Thankfully, the blood had not left any bigger marks on it yet, but after also taking off the singlet I had been wearing underneath, I found that it was completely soaked. The blood had already started to dry, causing me to flinch in pain as I had to peel the crusted fabric off my skin. "Why'd they bleed out though?" Madeline asked. "It's because tattoo ink partly consists of iron, I believe," I explained. "The underground really doesn't like that kind of stuff, does it?" I dropped the bloodied singlet under my seat before grabbing my backpack and pulling out my whip and revolver. After I had failed to keep either of them at hand last time, I wanted to make sure I'd have them close by in case I would need them. "The one with the people with no faces?" Darius offered. "Actually, a ton of the older ones have a thing for the number 3. Like, they always do stuff 3 times, the rabbit-headed girl chimed in. Like eating 3 berries at once or repeating what they say 3 times. I never quite understood what the deal with that is, though." "Sorry, I kinda need your help," I explained curtly. I felt sorry for interrupting her, especially since she had no idea what I had experienced these last few days. I made a mental note to tell her sometime. She'd totally freak out. "What does the number 3 mean?" She paused for a second. "Like, in occultism?" "Okay. First thing that comes to mind is the rule of 3. Not sure how to explain, but think, like, karma. You know, everything you do comes back to you. The threefold law basically just says that it comes back to you 3 times. It can count for every aspect of life, but it's especially related to magic. Then there's the number 3 in the Christian faith, as in the devil tempted Jesus 3 times, and there's the Holy Trinity and so on." Her voice trailed off. "Why you wanna know?" "I'll explain later, I promise." "Okay, thanks, bye," I quickly stammered before ending the call. "You think that may be it?" I asked Madeline. We pulled up in front of the park's employee entrance only minutes later. The sun had fully set by now and the moon was high in the sky. I could see the Ferris wheel looming over us in the distance, faintly shimmering in the pale silver light. It looked ominously foreboding. "I'm not quite sure, to be honest. I need to go on my own though. First, I gotta get to Nathan. That was the aim of my wager, after all. I'm not sure if Warren is already here, but I don't think it matters either way. He never said I had to beat him to the park, just that I'd have to be here before 2 days passed. And this was hardly one single day, so I think I'm good. Let's just hope he makes good on his promise." I swallowed, looking up at the night sky pensively. "Maybe we should call the others," Darius offered. "You know, in case things get out of hand." His audible concern and the implications of his words sent a shiver down my spine. "I don't want to get them into trouble," I muttered. The rabbit-headed girl nodded. I cracked her and my colleague a forced smile before turning to get on my way. "Be careful," I heard Madeline shout after me. I was heading for Twin Vale Point, but I couldn't help but stop by the horror section. Mr. Scratch's cage stood deserted next to the funhouse. I simply wanted to see him. I needed this. I whistled sharply, then uttered his name a couple times. Finally, I could hear rustling coming from somewhere around the corner, and only seconds later, the sock puppet came bounding out from behind the building. He would have almost collided with me, but came to a surprisingly swift halt and rubbed his horned black head against my shoulder in greeting. It took us a while to find the stagecoach. Just when I was about to panic, thinking that Warren had screwed me over and taken away Nathan to some other place, I heard the sound of horses puffing. I spun around and there he was. He had parked the carriage right in front of a saloon. I shuddered when I realized that it was the exact same one in which I had encountered the laughing cowboy for the last time. The last time before I had learned his name. Still, I immediately ran over to the coach seat, the sock puppet following suit. Nathan was sprawled out across it, peacefully slumbering, the plush stork clutched tightly in his hands. I reached up to nudge him awake. His eyes fluttered open and he drowsily sat up in his seat. Yes. Yes, it's me. Are you all right? Of course. He slurred. Why wouldn't I be? What are you doing here? Wait for what? Nathan asked, regarding me and my fluffy companion in confusion. Suddenly, Mr. Scratch let out a low, soft growl. I spun around only to find the broad silhouette of a man standing out against the moonlight. He was casually leaning against the wooden porch pillar of the closed gift shop right across from us. I could tell by the fit of his clothing that he was Colt again. Good to see you. A low chuckle erupted from his throat. Did you miss me? So. Will you make good on your wager? I'm here. I made it. I tried hard to sound firm, but my voice was shaking ever so slightly. Like hell you did. You said, find and capture. Me and my friend kicked your ass, I'd hardly call that captured. I said come here, he repeated, more sternly this time. I'm not sure why, but I felt my eyes tear up ever so slightly. Make good on your bargain, I hissed, clinging to the sock puppet's fur. I could hear a growl rumble in his throat ever so quietly. To be frank, I did not think you would make it. When I was underground at the time, I was not even looking for you to be honest. He let out a short laugh. Imagine my surprise. I caught Nathan's glance out of the corner of my eye. He was looking beyond confused. What's going on? He stammered. I shook my head in his direction. Warren pushed himself off the pillar and slowly began to approach us. There was a certain ease in his step, but as he got closer, I could see the deep scowl on his face. He reached out, grabbed Nathan by the collar and swiftly flung him off his coach seat. He let out a startled gasp followed by a muffled grunt as his body hit the ground. Warren shrugged and gave Nathan a small kick in the ribs. I lunged at him, pushing him away. He stumbled a few steps backwards, but quickly regained his footing. Ignoring Warren's sneer, I bent down by Nathan's side. He was lying in the dirt, motionless. Nathan, I uttered, patting him on the shoulder. My heart was pounding in my chest and my head was spinning. I had no idea what was happening. Are you okay? Say something. My friend let out a low groan. Warren chuckled from behind me. Ah, he'll be fine. If you were to only sit on a carriage all day, you would not remember how to walk right away either. He is just a little weak is all. I swallowed and shakily rose to my feet. Does that mean you fixed him? Just like that? After a short pause, I added, are you shitting me? I am not. He sounded almost annoyed with me. Think about it. It was me who chose him. He belonged to me. It was due to my will that he was bound to that carriage. When I want him to be able to get off it again, he can get off it. I froze. That was part of your end of the wager. You said you would. I said nothing of that sort. Your exact words were that you wanted me to, and I quote, stop whatever weird shit I started doing to your body. I will therefore not try to feed you again." His usage of the word, feed, nearly made me gag. "Not that I'd need to anymore." "That was what you meant, right?" he added mockingly. 11 days. It's been 11 days since I first fed you. Face it. You are way too far gone for there to be anything left one could consider salvageable. It's just a matter of time now until it's complete. "No," I breathed, then, more fiercely, repeated, "No. You're lying, you fucking asshole, this isn't how this works. I asked you for it, and you said it was common sense." My voice trailed off as I began to fumble for words. Not knowing what else to say, anger took over and I lunged at him, pushing uselessly against his chest. He just laughed. He stood there and he just fucking laughed. "But you just did it with Nathan." I protested. "I know. I wish you would stop doing that," he hissed. "Is this really the road you want to go down? Come on now. We both know you were meant to." "You think he will help you?" Warren called out, appearing to have noticed my confusion. "He won't attack the one who made him." "Come, quick," I panted. I did not have to tell them twice. Darius grabbed the rabbit-headed girl by the hand and pulled her along with him while the others followed suit. I led them to the restaurant where the pianist was playing, wrapped and unfazed as always. We crouched down behind the counter and I had to take a moment to catch my breath. I needed to kill Warren. I knew it had not worked the last time I had tried it, but the second I was about to discard the idea, the number 3 popped up in my mind. And all at once, I realized something I had never thought of before. 3rd time's the charm, right? Maybe all it took to actually destroy him were 3 relatively successful attempts. The first one had been made by Colt when he shot him with the iron bullets, the second one by me a few nights prior, and now. About 15 minutes later, I was standing beside the entrance of the hospital-themed funhouse. My heart was hammering in my chest when I opened my mouth and called his name. At first, I received no response. I called out again. "Warren? Warren, where are you? I just want to talk. I promise I won't try anything this time." You're very good at sneaking up on me, I'll give you that. Or am I just easy to startle?" I stammered breathlessly. He stared at me with piercing pale eyes, an unreadable expression on his face. He didn't reply. I cursed inwardly. I could only pray this would work one more time. He slowly, ever so slowly shook his head, but his face remained stiff and numb. I slowly took a step towards the entrance of the funhouse to see if he would follow. He did. I proceeded to walk inside before halting, waiting for him to come closer. Half of the room was pitch black, no moonlight shining reaching the far corners. The second he set foot inside, I grabbed him by the arm, pulled him closer and pushed him to the floor, letting out a scream. "Now! We got him!" Mitchell yelled. I fumbled for my phone and switched on its flashlight, pointing it at the struggling and hissing pretender. I then reached out to tear open his shirt. Peeling the wrinkly old fabric aside, I laid eyes on the 3 bullet holes. Ignoring the queasy feeling in my stomach, I plunged my pointer and middle finger into the lower one. I almost gagged as I made contact with the frayed, rotten flesh. Warren let out a howl of pain as my fingers proceeded to search for the iron bullet. I could only pray it wasn't too deep down. Then, finally, my fingertips met with something hard. I pinched it with my nails and attempted to pull it out. It took me about an entire minute to produce it from the grayed flesh, but when I finally did, I wasted no time and tore out the other 2 as fast as I could. Warren was thrashing and squirming and my friends were visibly straining themselves to keep him in place. I dropped my phone. I had no idea if this would work in any way. Still, I felt like I should at least try. I removed the locket from my neck and pressed it to the upper bullet wound. Its tip sank into the flesh, but it wasn't nearly deep enough. I looked down at Warren and he stared back up at me with void pale eyes. For once, there was no hatred in his gaze, no jeer, no mockery, and for a short moment, a mere split second, I hesitated. My friends uncertainly pulled away from him. It was only when Caroline hugged me from behind, squealing that I'd made it, that I felt hot, thick tears running down my cheeks. Madeline jumped out from her hiding place, cheering and clapping her hands, but I felt like she was just somewhere far, far away. I still know I stammered something about Nathan lying in Twin Vale Point and that he needed help, quickly, but everything else is just a blur by now. I woke up this morning to 5 missed calls from Dale, 2 from Mitchell, 1 from Darius and 3 from an unknown number. I called Darius back first. He told me that he had brought Nathan to a hospital. He had apparently woken up about 6 hours after they had taken him in. He asked if I was okay, and I told him I was. I asked him about Madeline and he told me she had stayed in the park for the night. The next person I called was Dale. He picked up immediately. After he had apologized a couple times and I reassured him that it was fine, he revealed that he was still on his way back to the park, but had already heard of what had happened as Mitchell had told him everything over the phone. I asked about the contract and whether it was still in place. He grew very stern as he told me that it was, but with Warren gone, there was no enforcer, and Mulberry and Moth most certainly wouldn't fill the role. Of course, I immediately told him about Madeline, suggesting he'd talk to the elders underground and see to it that maybe she could take his place. I think if the contract has to live on, she's the best guard of the park that we could possibly come across. Dale said he liked the idea and that he would see what he could make of it. I also asked if I could have my job back, and he said he could hardly deny me this wish given the circumstances. I found my backpack resting near my bedside. I emptied it, spilling its contents all over the floor. Apart from my used clothing and the revolver which I dared not to look at, there was one of the iron nails I had carried around with me earlier too. I picked it up, feeling a slight sting. I'm not sure why, but I felt uncomfortable holding it. I tossed into the trash can, then proceeded to freshen up and got on my way to the park. Just a quick visit to satisfy my yearning for the sock puppet. The first being I encountered, however, was Madeline. She was sitting by the employee entrance, almost as if she had been expecting me. I smiled at her. I'm okay, I guess. How are you doing? I'm great. Not only hasn't anyone shown up to get me yet, I also had a really good night's rest. I slept in the room of the piano man. Right on top of his piano. She giggled. She proceeded to take me by the hand and lead me off into the park. We passed the aged diva on our way through Hollywood and I waved at her. Hi, Grace. I called out. She didn't say anything, but I believe to have seen her crack the tiniest of smiles. What? I rose to my feet. You're kidding, right? No. He really isn't, she insisted. The entrance to the underground, where is it? We gotta go check. I led her over to the restroom, Mr. Scratch following the two of us. To Madeline's great relief, we found the restroom door in place and locked, just like we had left it after our investigation last time. God, it feels like that was ages ago. I refrained from pointing out to her that the restroom window was open. We went by the Candyland to check on Moth and Mulberry. The ballerina was dancing atop her little stage and the mime was hanging on one of the light fixtures as always. Soon after, I headed back home to finally answer the other missed calls I had. The one from the unknown number was from a phone Nathan had requested to use in the hospital. He asked if I could come over. I told him I was flattered that he wanted to see me and that I had more or less expected him to want to talk to Dale first. I told him I understood. While I personally believe this notion to be perfectly reasonable, in the end it's none of my business. As of me writing this, I'm having lunch in the living room while watching a rerun of a season of Kitchen Nightmares. I'm going to go visit Nathan right after though. I want to bring him some flowers too. I decided on the potted laurel tree. For some reason, the thought of having that ugly thing stand around in my living room any longer really isn't that appealing to me anymore.
Alright, quick break before our next story. Let's check in with our resident spooky dude. Hey, you ever smile, or is your face just stuck that way?
I smiled once. The sky bled. A child vanished. Never again.
Okay, drama. Maybe next time just try a dad joke.
Knock knock. They never made it to the door.
Wow. Fine, stay moody. Anyways, back to the darkness. This next one's got teeth.
I've been crying for the last few hours. I can still hear my wife screaming and sobbing in the other room. I have never regretting something so much in my entire life. I'm making this on an anonymous account because I don't want anyone to find out who I am. You'll see soon why. This is the only post I'll ever make with this profile. I wish I could take it back. The worst part of all of this is that I could have stopped it from happening. I could have fucking prevented this from happening. But it's too late now. Maybe this will keep you all from making the same mistake. I read this article on this site. And number X200B. I've seen ads online for these AI text photo sites like Dale, and whatnot myself, on sites like Instagram. So, I started to ask myself, what if you didn't just ask the AI for the future, but let it show it to you? Last night, I went on to Dale. It's free and easily found online for any of you stupid enough to play around with it. All I typed in was, me, my wife, and our 2-year-old son's future. This is what I got back. And number X200B. 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 The screaming. The wailing. My son was dead in an instant. And that fucking AI photo had captured it almost perfectly. I swear to God. It even got the color of his shirt right. Oh God. I could have done something. It had warned me. But I was too stupid to listen. I had had a gut feeling all day. But I didn't even think of it. I was busy today with work and errands. It slipped my mind. Curiosity killed the cat. I don't know if knowing would have made a difference. But I know now that I am tortured by the fact that I got to see the future and did nothing to change it. It's my fault. I cannot even begin to describe the guilt and pain I feel right now. Me and my wife got back from the hospital an hour ago. I went into our bedroom, and I've been typing this up. Maybe if all of you read this you'll learn from me. For the love of God, don't go messing with things you don't understand. Please. This AI shit is more powerful than any of us realize. And if you do decide to be stupid and ask about your future, consider that you may be better off not knowing. And number X200B. This is the last thing I will ever write. A final good thing for the world before I leave it. I have it in my hands now. And number X200B. And who am I to keep the future from coming?
Something's still listening, and it wants more. Next story. Just don't say its name.
My wife bought a reborn doll to cope with the death of our child, by Sugarfruit 33. My child died after only a month on this earth. I'm going to spare myself the tears on explaining how, but the tears of my wife are ones I'll never forget. Grief is ugly, it's so fucking ugly. When we lost him, it sounded as if my wife was regurgitating fragments of her soul. Her wails could have shattered glass, curdled blood. The cries would turn to screams, screams at the universe, at whichever sick, twisted higher power would let this happen, at herself, at me. She'd scream until the skin of her throat shredded to ribbons. I'll be honest, I didn't cry. I don't remember if I even shed a tear. But not because I wasn't upset, I didn't cry because it felt like she was already doing it for me. No pain is more shared than a grieving mother's cry. I wished there was a handbook on grief, for dummies, if you will. One that could have especially prepared me for the before and the after. Before, you're just waiting, like you're watching an hourglass of life on its last grain. My heart is pumping while he flatlines, and it hits like a wave. I'm going to have to grieve, I thought to myself. Before I could even experience it, I thought about how it was coming right for me. And I knew that in the blink of an eye, life was going to be something that I'd have to fight for. Maybe I was already grieving him before he went, maybe I was prepared. Or I just thought I was. I don't think you ever could be prepared. Then, you reach the after. Not the moment you leave the hospital room, or even the drive home. It's the moment you open that front door, the air sucked out of the room, and you feel that thorough fucking void, that void in your chest, in your relationship, in your home. This is it, this is my life now. This is real. I couldn't help but grieve the life he could have had instead of the one we lost. My wife felt differently, she missed their skin touching, humming to him, even dragging herself out of bed at 3 a.m. because he was crying again. He laid in a box that was small enough to cradle in my arms. When they lowered him into the ground, the cries emerged again. My wife wailed into the clear morning sky, so guttural it was as if it was happening all over again. But she didn't collapse into my arms, she collapsed to the ground, as if she wanted to join him. Each day doesn't get easier, it just gets farther away from the day it happened. The mornings are the worst, you wake up, your eyes creak open, the morning sun is pouring through your window, and then you remember that you're grieving, as if you could forget. Little things began to tick us off. One of us would forget to do the dishes and it'd end up with someone sleeping on the couch or taking a long, midnight drive. We tried couples therapy, but we needed so much more therapy than that. It wasn't even about us, it was about him. The wedge was him. I was at my wit's end with how to deal with this, but it appeared that my wife was one step ahead of me when I heard a soft humming from our bedroom after I came home from work. My brows furrowed as I made my way upstairs. The last time I heard her hum this tune was at the hospital, right before the heart rate monitor hummed back. When I pushed the cracked open door, I felt like I was dreaming. She was laying in our bed, cradling a baby in her arms, looking down at it like she could see every planet, every star, every galaxy. I remember pinching my thigh as I stared at her, the slight pain stinging. She stretched a smile that had become so foreign. Oh, this? It's a reborn doll. I raised a brow at her. They're realistic dolls for mothers to help me cope. She nodded rapidly, her smile weakening. It was as if I had disrupted the fantasy just by asking. Has it helped? Do you want to hold him? A slight chill ran down my spine as its cold skin was placed onto my palms. I pulled it close and cradled it, staring down at it. And suddenly, I crumbled into tears. It felt too fucking real. I dropped to my knees as it laid in my shaking arms, my scrunched face already wet. I knew it wasn't actually my son, but I realized how much I missed this, not just the moments we lost. My wife patiently waited as I wailed with my head hung. I let out cries I never knew I could, my voice cracking with each ugly sob. After that day, I noticed things getting better. It didn't fill the voids, but something else stood inside of them for a while, just to keep them dormant. My body jolted as I whipped around. Our nursery. We stared at each other with accusations of insanity. Look. I've researched these dolls, and I understand how this helps you. I'll admit, it's helped me a bit too. But this? You know this isn't our Dash. This isn't our what? Suddenly I was tongue-tied. I could feel a million words crawling up my throat, but the only thing that came out was, okay. I think I need some alone time with him. I nodded, looking away as I slipped past her. I was trying to be patient with her, I really was. But I just couldn't meet her at the lengths she was going. Pretending this is our kid may help her, but it only made me feel worse. Liv. Wake up. I'll handle him, get some sleep. I stared at her wide-eyed, my throat knotted, as she tiredly walked out of the room. As she stepped into the nursery, I began to hear her over the speaker. I blinked like a deer in headlights as I listened to her hum, the crying slowing to a stop. My eyes shifted towards the door as she walked back in, grabbed her sleeping mask and laid back down. She didn't say a word as I just continued to stare. A part of me wanted to go into the nursery, but I just laid there till my eyes dried and ran bloodshot. Before I knew it, the sun was up and I had to go to work. I slowly stood up and stiffly got ready. I tried to convince myself that it was a dream, but I had already woken up from one. When I finished getting dressed, I kissed her as she slept and left the room. As I passed the nursery, I paused for a moment. At first I considered going in, but instead I pressed my ear against the door. But there was nothing, just absolute silence. I don't know what I thought I was going to hear, I didn't even know what I heard last night. I couldn't tell if hearing something now would have made me feel more or less insane. Hey, hun. Be quiet when you go upstairs, I just put him down and it wasn't without a fight, she chuckled. I anxiously cleared my throat as she quickly glared at me, then looked away. At least I was trying to play along. I quietly walked upstairs, minimizing the creaks of each step. As I passed the door, I could feel my breathing and heartbeat halt to a stop, something about it just always knocked the wind out of me. I was thinking of taking him to a mommy and me class. I looked up, my chewing slowed. Is that? Sounds good, I bit my tongue and smiled. I couldn't tell if she was being serious or if she just wanted to talk. Thank you. Watching her eat, the look on her face, I could tell she could barely get the food down her throat. She was trying, she was really fucking trying. I felt guilty for not being more understanding, it was hard to accept that we were just going to be grieving in different ways no matter what. But I was at a crossroads when it felt like our grief couldn't help each other. Come say goodnight. What the fuck is wrong with you? Him. Not it, him. Okay. He smells like a fucking dumpster fire. What? Does he have built-in fecal mechanics too? Just admit that this is a joke to you. You think I'm embarrassing myself, that I'm crazy. Just say it. Liv, no. I flew out of the room before I could burst into tears of fury. I felt like such a fucking monster. Prioritizing both of our healing was just tearing me apart, it was tearing us apart. I curled up on the couch and screamed into the pillow, leaving tear stains on the cover. I sobbed until it exhausted me, eventually knocking me out. Suddenly, my eyes shot open as something sharp impaled the bottom of my foot. Fuck. Shit. I hissed to myself as I lifted my foot. I swallowed a scream as I placed the crimson-coated shard on the kitchen counter. Then, I noticed some white powder on the bottom of my foot as well. I limped around the kitchen, soon finding a shattered cookie jar and an open flour bag spilled across the floor. I quickly tied an unused dish rag around my foot and began picking up the shards. The stress of the cut and the mess overshadowed the thought of how it even fell in the first place. But this thought came front and center when I noticed small flour-coated footprints leading out of the kitchen. I slowly placed the last shard in the trash as my eyes stared under furrowed brows. I limped over and kneeled down, observing them closely. They looked like... No, impossible. I told myself it was impossible. But who else could have feet that small? It wasn't my wife, and it wasn't an animal. An uneasiness clouded over me as I quickly vacuumed it up. The trail was longer than I realized as I exited the kitchen and made my way through the living room. Eventually, I reached the stairs, noticing the footprints went up them too. My eyes slowly glided up, then stared deeply into the dark hallway. I was able to at least try and logically explain the crying the other night, but I couldn't make anything of this. I held back tears as I made sure there wasn't any glass left in my foot, then properly bandaged it. With everything that had happened and was happening, all I could think was, why us? Why me? I just wanted to be a husband, a father, a family. Why does life's unfairness have to be so cruel? It's more than just not getting what you want, it's losing what you love. It's your son dying after only a month of being. It's not unfair, it's just cruel. So fucking cruel. After securing the bandage, I limped out of the bathroom, my body weighing with exhaustion. Then, I halted in front of the nursery door, my eyes scrunching shut as the sound of crying suddenly came from behind it. Never in my life have I prayed, not even for my son, it felt like shouting into a void. But at that moment, I prayed. I prayed for it to end. I needed it to end. But nobody was listening, life wasn't that fair, I should have known that. I opened my eyes, tears welling in them, and kept walking past it. The cries grew fainter as there was a ceiling between us, but I could still hear them. I could feel them crying for Daddy as I laid my heavy head on the couch pillow. I had hoped that my wife would wake up and deal with it, but she never did. The entire night I laid there, the tears drying against my cheeks as it relentlessly cried. My psyche was shattering piece by piece as it grew impossible to even keep a grasp on reality or try and figure out what the fuck was going on while its screams filled my ears and bounced around in my skull. "Jack," my wife suddenly said, her hand resting on my shoulder. "Didn't mean to scare you. Is everything all right? I want to apologize for last night. You've been very patient with me, and I feel like I've been asking you for more than you can handle." We paused in silence for a moment, our eyes shifting around each other. Suddenly, she broke into tears, collapsing into my chest. I held her close as her tears soaked through my shirt. My heart shattered. "It's okay. It's okay. You can always get a new one. It's a doll. You can get a new one." Surprised you didn't say, "Thank God." "Right. Whatever works for you." I smiled weakly. My puzzled expression twisted further as I saw my wife cradling it in her arms. "Wow. Already? So fast." "Express shipping," she shrugged with a chuckle. "I'm gonna try and put him down for his nap. Could you brew me a cup?" "Yeah, sure," I smiled before closing the door behind me. The second she couldn't see me anymore, I stood absolutely baffled. Something about it just seemed off. How could she have gotten a new one that quickly? It didn't add up. She had gotten so attached to it, the thought of her wanting to keep it, no matter the mold, didn't surprise me. What hurt the most is that she'd lied to me. After filling the steaming mugs, I set them down at the table and read the news on my phone as I waited for her to come down. He didn't put up a fight, thank God, she sighed with relief as she trotted downstairs. That's good, I sipped my coffee, keeping my eyes on the screen. She sat across from me, taking slow sips as she stared off in a daze again. I occasionally glanced up at her, watching her tap her finger against the mug and bite her cheek. She laughed at the question, circling her finger around the rim of the mug. It is. Maybe you should spend some time outside. You could take him out for a walk. Hope you two have a nice time, I smiled. We'll be back soon. But I was stupid to forget that life isn't unfair, it's cruel. In the middle of the night, I was awoken by the cries over the baby monitor again. Only this time, as my eyes opened, I realized I couldn't move anything else. My heart pounded as I drew in panicked breaths. My jaw merely trembled as I attempted to speak, pleas for help caught in my throat. A tear streamed down the side of my face as I waited for my wife to wake up, but she didn't. I was locked on that bed, unable to do nothing but listen to its cries. I wanted to scream, sob, punch a fucking wall, but I could do absolutely nothing. Suddenly, the speaker cut out, its cries halting with a statusy screech. I couldn't see it, but I could tell it was moving closer, and with each step its cries grew deeper. It reached the point that it sounded like it was gargling on its own blood. When it stood by my ear, its sobs were deafening. Now, I couldn't move, and I couldn't hear anything besides this suffocating, dizzying crying that made me feel like I was drowning in molten tar. Dada, it gurgled. My God, what happened? Jesus. She hopped off the bed and kneeled next to me, my body flinching as she reached for me. Where are you going? What happened? Jack. I ignored her calls as I threw the nursery door open. My eyes darted around as I searched for it, then realized it was in the crib. I'm not doing this anymore. She gasped in horror as I yanked it out of the crib. You're right, Olivia. This isn't a doll. This is a fucking parasite. And I want it gone. She winced as I screamed. Then, in one final burst of rage, I gripped it by its throat and slammed it to the ground with all of my might. In this moment, I realized that I learned two things from the death of my son. My wife crumbled to her knees as she let out those cries, the ones I could never forget. My breathing and heartbeat practically stopped, my body shutting down for a moment as I stared down at the spilled, graying organs and mushy skin that she attempted to cup in her trembling hands. I slowly looked up at her, utter horror hanging on my expression. He didn't belong down there. He belongs with me. With us.
Still here? Aw, look at you. Brave little meatbag. Too late to back down now. Next story's already watching.
After the text from Mom, I didn't have time to think. I didn't know what to think either, I just knew I had to get out of there before my dad arrived. So in a panicky haze I quickly grabbed the laptop, and Dave the cat, who'd been loitering diligently just outside the door, and ran down the deserted street sobbing hysterically. I had no idea where I was going, or what I was doing. I guess I just figured that running was a solid plan given the circumstances. I got about halfway down the block before the rational part of my brain interfered. Why am I running? Shouldn't I show this video to someone? The police? My brother? I slowly came to a halt as I considered all my options. How sure was I that this wasn't just a prank? How could it be a prank? Who in their right FNG mind would think that this was even remotely funny? No, it was the truth all right, there was simply no denying it. I gently placed Dave on the ground as I fished the phone out of my pocket, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. "Sir, you're not making any sense. What is your location?" "My father's car." "You gotta hurry." I yelled into the phone. "He's here." I somehow managed to pocket the phone while juggling the laptop and Dave, stumbling down the street aimlessly. I could hear the sound of car tires approaching from behind, my dad, more than likely, and in a moment of panic I decided to run up to a random apartment, banging on the front door awkwardly with my elbow. I saw movement behind closed curtains, then a pair of inquisitive eyes glancing at me briefly, before disappearing again. Of course they weren't gonna let me in. I was a grown-ass man in my pajamas, carrying a laptop and fat cat named Dave. But I was hoping they'd call the cops on me. "Jeffy," my dad's voice beckoned from behind. "Please, son, get in the car. I think you're a little bit confused." No way," I said, feverishly trying to find a way to escape that didn't require me to use any of my arms. "I saw the video, the baby and mom and everything." So here's a weird thing, I sort of believed him. Sure, looking back on it, it was a stupid Fingy thing to do. But you weren't there. You weren't in my head. You don't know them like I did. They were just so painfully dull, you know. A boring, old couple. Nothing about them ever stood out. They were normal. So unbelievably normal. And a 5-minute video can't undo decades of carefully planned indoctrination. "That's a good boy," my dad said, patting me on my back as I climbed into the back seat. Dave was getting fairly fed up with all the back and forth, and he'd scratched me up pretty severely on my panicky half-assed escape, so I focused on calming him down. "Where are we going?" I inquired, staring out the window idly. We were heading out of town, and I couldn't for the life of me figure out why. I heard a soft chuckle, seemingly innocent enough, but for some reason I didn't like the sound of it. "I figured a few days down by the old cabin would do you wonders," he said. "Get you back on track. We cannot move lest we leave a demon behind in the hurricane, you know." "Yeah, but which one?" It seemed very sophisticated. "Justin was there last weekend? During the lockdown?" I asked, gently placing Dave on the floor below me. "He drove 2 hours for that." He didn't respond right away, briefly glancing at me in the rearview mirror. I could tell that he was having a hard time keeping up with his rather poorly executed lies. "Yes, I mean, we'd planned it for months, so we couldn't, you know, cancel it because of some silly old bug." He let out a sigh of relief, and I could see the smile returning to his face. The next part one didn't really think through. It was an impulsive decision, you could say. An act of misguided self-preservation mixed with varying degrees of rage and fear. He didn't see it coming, I'll tell you that much. An arm around his neck, squeezing as hard as I possibly could. The part one didn't really think through was obviously the fact that he was operating a moving vehicle at high speed. But sometimes you'll make it. Sometimes you'll climb out of the flaming wreckage, laptop and Dave in hand, leaving the unconscious, fatally wounded body of your murderous fake father behind to burn slowly to death in the most horrible way imaginable. And that's okay. That's great, even. Just go with it, I say. There was nothing around for miles, and I was in a pretty bad shape. I stumbled confusedly into the dark woods, not quite knowing what to do, or where to go. I just knew I had to get away from the car. Away from the flames. Away from everything. I can't say for how long I wandered around in a dazed stupor, but it was getting dark when I found the old cabin. It wasn't much, nothing more than a shed really, but it was enough. I managed to crack open a window and climb inside, finally allowing poor fat Dave to roam on his lonesome for a few, while I found an old worn-down couch, planting my exhausted body face down in it. "Jeffy," my mom sang cheerily. "I'm so glad you answered. I've been trying to reach your dad for hours now, but he won't pick up. I don't suppose you know what he's up to." "He's, dead," I said. "I hope. Car accident, crash." "We'll see about that, Jeffy," she said calmly. "You know I'll always find you. Wherever you are, whatever you do, Mommy is coming for you." My phone vibrated again, a text message from Mom. With trembling fingers I opened it, only to drop the phone to the floor the moment I realized what I was looking at. It was a photo. A young woman and her baby, sitting on my mom's couch. I recognized her instantly. It was their neighbor, Jenna. Single mom, kinda cute. I've had a crush on her for ages, but I've never acted on it. Don't know how, you know. A single sentence captioned the image, and it sent tremors of cold chills down my spine. "If you leave me, Jeffy, I'll have to replace you with someone new. TCC." And number X200B. Update.
Still with us? Good. That last one was just the warm-up. Let's go deeper.
When I was 26, my friend and I decided we were going to sail around the world. Stupid? Yes. As I type this, I am 3.5 years into this journey, with an estimated 2 weeks until I reach home base. Samuel and I had saved up a lot of money ever since we were teenagers. We bought a yacht together, aka a tattered, 35-foot boat that was built in the 1960s with a nice motor and huge sails. It took some work to get it going again but was worth every penny. We had plenty of food, clean water, water purifiers, medicine, flare guns, solar generators, batteries, a pro GPS, all the essentials. We also have a nice satellite thingy that Sam set up so we can have Wi-Fi on board. It only works about 10% of the time, truth be told, but if you're reading this, it means it's done its job. The past 3.5 years have been, interesting. Some weird shit has happened but I don't have time to type it all out now. The only thing of importance now is surviving the situation I'm in, and creating this written record of what happened. It started a couple of hours ago. We were quietly admiring them. We had talked so much in that past 3 years, but the silent moments we shared were the ones I remembered most. Like that moment we were in then, silently watching the stars at night and sipping some bubbly. Or the first morning we set sail, we didn't talk for almost 2 hours as we watched the sun rise. As it first appeared as a red blob climbing over the ocean's end, Sam was strumming "Here Comes the Sun" on his guitar. The salty wind was hitting our face and I thought, this is it, no looking back, this is the beginning of this whole journey. I thought about these moments and more like them, but I was broken from my daze as I noticed Sam had stood up from his seat, rather quickly, and was staring off into the dark horizon. I thought I saw a flare. I looked out in the same direction he was and waited. A couple seconds passed, then a skinny, barely visible streak of red appeared. It was a couple miles away, maybe more. Sam turned to me. "Flare. Let's go. Now." Got it. I ran to the controls and started up the engine. Just a little longer, I think. So, we did, but this is where things took a turn. No, not a turn. A turn implies the driver is still on the road. No, things didn't take a turn, things drove off a fucking cliff. Whoa. Slow down. Sam yelled at me. I slowed down significantly. What is it? It's a stop sign. Sam muttered. We continued on for a while, not speaking, until I made a remark about the water. Wow, the water has really calmed down. These waves are baby waves. Seriously, Sam confirmed. This is the quietest the water has been in months, maybe years. If any of you have been out on the ocean in the middle of the night, you know how dark the water is. It's basically black. The only definition of the waves comes from the moonlight, and you can faintly make out where the waves break and crash. Well, as the sound diminished, so did the waves. The choppy black water had grown stiller, and stiller, and stiller. And now, it was still. It was black. It was flat. It looked like there was no ocean. There was no reflection from the moon or stars anymore, there was nothing beneath our boat but darkness. I'm not I turned to him. But then I noticed something far worse. He was no longer backlit by the moon. There were no stars behind his darkened figure. The only light came from our boat's lamps. There were no stars. There was no moon. There was no water. There was only us and our vessel. There was nothing beneath us, and nothing above us. The ship no longer rocked back and forth with the water's current. It was perfectly still, absolutely motionless. We floated somewhere in space and time, I know that much. But I had lost all direction. I felt like I was losing my sanity too. I had an odd out-of-body experience then. It was like I was a mile away from where I stood. I could see the small light emitting from the boat far off in the distance, and surrounding us was nothing but darkness. It looked like we were floating somewhere in outer space, a part of the universe void of any stars or light. What does the GPS say? I asked. Sam ran over to the navigation system's display. It says, his eyes were locked on the screen. He didn't finish his sentence. What? What does it say? That's impossible. You said that GPS works everywhere. Does it feel like we are falling to you? We looked off in the same direction, first towards where the horizon would have been, then down where the water should have been, then up at the starless sky. What came next was something I'd never experienced before, so I may have trouble explaining. That feeling that we were falling was gone. It had been replaced by a feeling that we were upside down. I don't really know how to describe it. At first, we were upright, not falling anymore. But then, we were turning, no, flipping. It felt like the whole boat was capsizing, turning over, very slowly. It kept turning over, and then stopped once I felt like we were perfectly upside down. It was still completely dark. There had been no change in scenery to indicate we had turned upside down. Nothing on the boat shifted at all. It was just a feeling. Like in outer space, there's no real up or down, but I'm sure an astronaut would be able to feel if they'd been turned upside down. Our locked eye contact was broken by light above us. It slowly appeared, but it was obvious that it was stars. It was the stars and moon in the sky once again. Oh, thank Christ, I said. We were upside down. Or we were still upright, and everything else had flipped. Help, he whimpered. And with that one word, I watched my friend fly upward, flail and scream for 10 agonizing seconds, then splash into the dark ocean above my head. He fell, I thought. He fell. He fell up, or down, into the sea. I ran into the cabin and began typing this out. I had come to the conclusion that I was going to die, somehow, and soon. I wanted my experience to be written out for someone to read, so someone knew what happened to me. I got about halfway through it before I heard the noise. It was falling on me. Or I was falling into it. And it was happening rapidly. And I don't know how or why, but I knew I was upright after that. I'm not sure if the boat flipped itself or maybe a wave helped flip it over. It all happened so fast, I don't know, but I knew I was upright then, floating in the ocean. But I'm floating, upright. That's good. But I'm floating, wandering with no control over my direction. That's bad. My GPS isn't working anymore. God knows where I am. I'm just hoping this internet thing Sam set up still works. God rest his soul. I just want to go home.
Anyway, let's lighten the mood with something fun and... Nah, just kidding. It gets worse. Hit it.
Assisted Suicide, by IIA. He'd wait until everyone was asleep before starting. I'd lie still and feign unconsciousness, but his voice would persist, weakly howling in terrible desperation, as he pleaded with me. Begged me. Implored me to help him take his life. In the garish brightness of daylight, I'd talk to my loved ones about our sleepless nights. The pity on their faces was obvious, so too was the resigned helplessness. They knew there was nothing they could do. All the suffering had to be endured by him, and, by association, me. I was his confidant, the only other person he felt comfortable speaking to. Sobbing to. Screaming to. Last night, we reached a breaking point. For hours, he screamed with impossible, ear-splitting power. He regaled me with detailed descriptions about the pain he was enduring. Pain that my inaction was forcing upon him. The screams grew quiet as his energy evaporated. Just like every other night. But rather than sobbing pathetically and begging, his tone grew sinister. His words became violent. "You're going to bleed to death," he informed me around a series of racking sobs. "Do you know how you'll feel knowing you could have ended this but didn't? Knowing you left the girls alone?" The mention of the twins caused me to jump out of bed with rage and indignation. He knew what he was doing. He'd finally figured out what it would take for me to acquiesce. The thought of Dominique and Shonda in foster care because of his hatefulness and my cowardice was too much to bear. Too much for any mother to bear. I started to cry while making the preparations I dreaded since the first night he began begging me to take his life. I didn't say a word to him as I got ready. Every so often, he'd call out and ask what I was doing. I didn't reply. He was too weak to scream. Too exhausted. All he spoke were pathetic words and phrases like, "Please," and, "It hurts so much." Words I'd heard over and over and over, but with them now was a sinister element of, "or else." I knew if I did what he wanted, I could be thrown in jail. The twins would be without their mom, just like he'd threatened. But this way, at least I'd be alive. Also, if I was careful, I could get my close friends to help me hide his body. They'd all but said they would in the past, in the darkest moments when I sought their comfort after months of restless nights. By the time everything was set up, he'd realized what was happening. He'd won. I felt sick. Part of me knew I was doing the right thing, that the suffering he'd endured was too much for anyone to have to experience. But another part, a larger part, was doing it for another reason. I wanted him dead. I wanted him out of my life and out of my daughter's lives and out of the periphery of my friends and extended family. I wanted my autonomy back. We went into the bathroom where everything could be scrubbed clean. Some time later, our 8 months of sleepless agony were over. The screaming had stopped. The pleading had stopped. The agony had stopped. Nothing remained but me and his corpse and the blood. Blood in the tub. Blood on my hands. Blood on my thighs. Blood on the coat hanger.
Need a break? Too bad. These stories don't wait, and neither do we. Next one's worse, in the best way.
Look, I get it. Clowns are creepy. I've heard it all. Clowns are childhood trauma in face paint. Clowns are demons with balloon animals. Blah blah blah, but for me, being a clown was rent money. I didn't choose the clown life chose me, well after I got fired from my last job. So yeah, I was Chuckles. Full-time party clown, part-time existential crisis in oversized shoes. And this? This is the story that made me hang up the rainbow wig forever. Client name, Meredith something or other. Location, suburbs. Big ass house. Think, we own a Peloton in every room, rich. Gig, just entertain the kids for an hour or two. Make them laugh. Do your little jokes. Meredith said on the phone, like she was talking to a Roomba, not a human being with feelings and clown shoes. I show up in full Chuckles gear, red nose, flower that squirts water and pants that are part tripping hazard, part fire hazard. I shuffle into the backyard, expecting to see 30 screaming kids high on sugar. Instead, I see 6 kids. All sitting completely still. Staring at me. Unblinking. Like children of the corn but in Baby Shark t-shirts. Me, trying to salvage the vibe, hey kiddos. Who's ready for some Chuckles with Chuckles? I tried to just ignore the creepy kid vibes and get the show rolling. Me, alright, who wants a doggy? Or a sword? Or, whatever this lumpy thing is, I think it's a giraffe with anxiety. She nods. The others are still staring. I laughed, awkwardly. Me, well that's one way to exit the industry, huh? It's me. Not normal me. It's clown me, on fire, bleeding black goo out of my eyes and screaming. Me, okay. That's not going on the fridge. Another clown. Taller than me. Silent. Grease paint running like it's melting. Eyes too wide. Smile way too big. Like, split to the ears big. He just stands behind the kids. No one reacts. Not even Meredith. Just me. Sweating and questioning my clown-based life choices. Me, okay, who's your friend? Lilith, that's the Scream Clown. The Scream Clown raises one gloved hand and slowly points at me. I swear I felt every hair on my body do the wave. He screams. Not like a person scream. It was static. It was old-ass TV static mixed with nails on a chalkboard and the sound of a train wreck wrapped in crying. I woke up in the shed. It was dark. Cold. Smelled like sadness and dry erase markers. There were scratch marks on the walls. A rainbow wig on the floor. A torn red nose in the corner and painted on the inside of the shed door, in big smudged letters. Everyone was fucking gone. No kids. No Meredith. No tall Scream Clown. Just a deflated bounce house and a lone sippy cup still dripping red juice on the grass. I quit that day. Haven't worn the costume since. Sometimes, when I'm driving and the radio fuzzes out, I think I hear that static scream in the distance. Sometimes I see drawings taped to poles in town. Crayon drawings of clowns on fire.
Whew, telling gave me chills. But hey, we're just getting started. The next one's sharper. You'll see.
I'm writing this to prove I existed. To document my journey and the horrors I've witnessed. If someone reads this, maybe it'll mean I was real. My name is ////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////////// live in backslash 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 backslash. Or at least, I did. I don't know anymore. Maybe I'm dead. Maybe not. I can't tell how long I've been here, days, weeks, longer. Time's twisted here. It doesn't behave. I'm not the type to be noticed. I'm the kind of person who can disappear for months without anyone truly wondering where I went. I have friends, real ones. Ones who care. Ones who keep trying to drag me back out into the world. But I don't like the world. I like my apartment. My bubble. It's safe. It's quiet. It doesn't judge me. I close my curtains and pretend the city outside doesn't exist. I keep the lights off and the blinds sealed tight. My whole life is inside these walls: sleep, eat, work online, play games alone, repeat. That cycle became my heartbeat. In here, time didn't move forward. It just looped, days blurring together like brushstrokes smeared across the same gray canvas. Loneliness used to hurt, but eventually, it became a comfort. At least when you're alone, no one expects anything from you. That entire week dragged like the countdown to an execution. I barely slept. My chest stayed tight. I kept procrastinating, kept telling myself I'd cancel, I'd fake an illness. My imagination ran wild trying to craft believable excuses. But none of them left my mouth. My breathing grew shallow. The descent was slow. A little too slow, stretched like molasses. Then everything changed. Instantly, the shaking stopped. The lights snapped off, plunging me into suffocating darkness. Silence wrapped around me, thicker than air. I slumped to the floor. Then, the lights came back, soft, strange, dimmer than before. And the elevator began descending again. Smooth. Silent. Unnatural. When I woke up, nothing had changed. The elevator was taking me somewhere else. The elevator slowed, then stopped. No ding. No announcement. Just a soft metallic groan, like something exhaling through the cracks in reality. The doors parted. My footsteps crunched over glassy fragments of something that might have once been buildings. Metallic skeletons jutted from the ground, twisted beyond recognition. I passed what looked like a melted swing set half buried in ash. A child's toy sat nearby, half disintegrated, staring at me with hollow eyes that made me look away. I tried calling out, just to hear something besides the hum of the atmosphere. My voice came out strange, muted, swallowed instantly, like the place didn't want sound. A groan. A massive, heavy exhale from something far off in the distance. Something alive. The sound rolled across the wasteland like thunder. I dropped to the ground and waited. Far across the glowing ravine, a shadow moved. I scrambled behind a chunk of rebar, my breath hitching. My throat felt scorched just from being in the air. I scanned for shelter, or anything resembling a way out. It stood out like a relic from my world, surrounded by twisted terrain like an island of normalcy in a sea of decay. But it was far. Too far. Despite only being a silhouette in the distance, I felt its gaze from a mile away. Every step felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The air tasted metallic. The land shifted beneath me, like it was trying to make me trip. But I reached the elevator. It was just standing there. No walls. No enclosure. Just the doors and the panel. It opened before I pressed anything. I stepped inside. No hesitation. The doors closed and it began to move. I stayed standing at first, rigid and alert, like prey that hadn't yet been spotted. The fluorescent light above blinked intermittently, long pauses, brief flickers. Its rhythm broken, like a metronome set to an irregular heartbeat. I lost track of time again. It wasn't hours or minutes. It was something different. Something more ancient. I sat there in that suspended moment, breathing as if relearning how. Then, ding. Not loud. Not cheerful. Just inevitable. He didn't acknowledge me. Not even with a twitch. He took his place near the doors and stood with the posture of someone used to being ignored. Limp arms. A tilt of the head that spoke of habit, not awareness. The doors closed. We descended. The silence grew legs and crawled up the walls, settling into my ears like parasites. I didn't dare shift. Even the sound of blinking felt like a scream. A scent crept in. Dust. Sweat. Old paper. Like a forgotten file cabinet forced open in the dark. It wasn't a smell, it was a memory leaking from the vents. Then, ding. The doors opened to a hallway. Inside those barely ajar doorways came noises. Not words. No language. Just reactions. Figures emerged, clothed in various attire, business outfits, party dresses, school uniforms. They drifted around him, orbiting, talking, living. He remained still in the center of their world, unmoving, unmoved. A relic. A placeholder for someone more acceptable. More social. More normal. Their conversations passed through him like smoke. Their joy ignored his presence like it was background noise. Just before the doors slid shut, he turned. Not fully. Just enough to make eye contact. Enough to be known. And then he was gone. I stayed in the elevator. Not that I had a choice. The kind that's expected. No announcement. No fanfare. No welcome. Just cold. The doors opened without ceremony. The room was dim. Hundreds of monitors, stacked like bricks in a mausoleum. Each blinked with life, and yet none acknowledged my arrival. No cameras. No lens. Just observation. A parking lot at dusk. One flickering streetlight. A woman sat in her car, unmoving, as if waiting for an unseen signal. A diner booth with cracked vinyl seating. Someone scribbled in a journal. The waitress passed back and forth, never making eye contact. A library desk where a child tried, and failed, to whisper. No adults nearby. Just rows of books, and one spine on the shelf seemed to pulse. Others displayed environments all too familiar. The clay man's room, seen from a higher angle. He stood exactly where I left him, surrounded by the same fancifully clothed figures. This time, he was facing the camera, as if sensing me through the screen. His motion stuttered and looped. A stairwell spiraling into flesh. Each step groaned, wet, living. At the bottom, a mouth whispered inaudible mutterings, as if spreading a secret I wasn't meant to hear. A lake, perfectly still, reflecting constellations not known to this world. Something below the water exhaled, and stars rose out one by one. A parade of beings, wrong in proportion, shifting between dimensions, marched silently down a corridor of clocks, all running backward. Time buckled around them. Their shadows refused to follow. I didn't try to count the monitors. There were hundreds. Maybe more. Yet only one mattered. Low and tucked behind a nest of tangled cables, barely visible, was the smallest monitor. It showed the elevator. Doors open. Empty. Flickering gently, like the eye of a beast pretending to sleep. Waiting for me to return. Or watching to see if I ever would. My phone. Only a few sites still respond. I can't explain why it works. I've stopped trying to. All I know is that this is one of the only places still listening.
You're still tuned to Horror Slop. Frequency unknown. Stories endless. Let's spin the next nightmare.
I used to play a game that I called Tree Kingdom, which consisted of my putting on a flower crown that my aunt made for me, and running through the trees with a giant branch. "Hello?" I asked. "Hi." A small voice replied. It was the first thing that came to mind. I had never seen another child in the woods before, and I knew that the neighbors were a bit too far away for their kids to come all the way out here. Okay. He was around my height, maybe an inch or two taller, and his hands looked like he had been digging in the mud. But that wasn't the part that shocked me. He was also wearing a paper bag mask on his head. It covered his entire face and neck and crinkled every time he moved his arms. There were 2 holes cut out for his eyes, but they were only big enough for him to see through. I couldn't make out the details of his eyes at all. He nodded and the bag crinkled. He shrugged. "I have to." We stood in silence for a few seconds. "I like your crown," he said finally, pointing to my head. "Thank you. My aunt made it for me." "Your aunt?" I pointed behind me, towards the house. "You don't live with your mom and dad?" I shook my head. "They died." "Oh." I spotted one and walked over and picked it up. He pointed into the woods. "Yeah, there are lots of houses. My aunt says there are no houses near here." He shrugged as he began walking further into the woods. "Bye, Amanda." He waved. That evening at dinner, I told my aunt about Eden. I didn't know this then, but she was obviously just humoring me, thinking that Eden was an imaginary friend, which is why it never occurred to her to tell me to be careful. I was collecting dandelions when he came running through the trees. "Where were you?" I set the dandelions down on top of the pile that I already gathered. I looked back at my aunt's house. She was going to working late today, and Vanya and Flynn were supposed to be babysitting me, but I knew they were too busy with their own stuff to even come out and check on me. "Okay. But only for a few minutes. I'm not supposed to go anywhere without telling my aunt." I followed Eden through the trees and we walking past a clearing and a small pond that I had never seen before. We finally stepped through some overgrown bushes and onto a stone path that led up to the back door of Eden's house. I followed him through his backyard and into the kitchen. "Mom," Eden called. I followed him through his house. It was a newer house, but it was pretty empty inside. The kitchen had an old wooden table in it, but no chairs or doors on the cabinets. There were no pictures or artwork on any of the walls, and the carpet in the rest of the house looked dirty and old. "Hi," I whispered. "Eden, who is this?" she asked, laughing awkwardly. "Amanda. In the woods." Well, does she know you're here? I shook my head. But Dash. I backed out of the living room and followed Eden back through his house and outside. As we walked through his backyard, I saw a few kids playing in the yards next door. They too, all had bags on their heads. They stopped kicking the ball around when they saw me, staring as I walked with Eden. "What's wrong?" Eden asked, moving his head to face me. "They're staring at me," I whispered. "It's because you're not wearing a bag." We kept walking, pushing through the bushes and back into the woods. "Hey, Eden." We turned to see the kids coming through the trees. There were about 5 or 6 of them in total. Eden and I stopped walking. He was bigger than the rest and wearing an old soccer uniform. "Hey Amanda," I replied. "Where did you come from, hey Amanda?" he asked. The other kids laughed. "Yeah. Where's her bag?" another one yelled. "Right here." The first kid pulled out a paper bag from behind his back and ran towards Eden and I. "Get her." I could barely see where I was going and looked up to see that the sky had gone dark. Not only that, but the moon was out. How long had I been running? It didn't feel longer than a few minutes. I could hear the kids yelling as they ran through the woods behind me, but I kept going. I could see my aunt's house in the distance and ran faster. I finally made it to the backyard and pushed through the back door, falling into the kitchen. She reached down and picked me up in her arms and I realized I was crying. "Where were you? Did you get lost?" she asked. She pushed away a bit so she could see my face and I shook my head. "No, I was at Eden's house." "Who's Eden?" she asked. I don't remember much after that, mainly due to the fact that everyone refused to talk about it. From then on, any time I played in the backyard, I was supervised by someone. I wasn't allowed to venture out into the woods anymore, and no one would tell me what happened with Eden. And I never saw him again. "Do we have any more boxes?" Flynn asked, coming into the kitchen. I watched as he picked up a box and began walking out of the kitchen. "Oh yeah, Mom had to call the cops to look for you. She thought you had been kidnapped." "Right. Did they ever find out what happened with Eden?" I asked. "What are you talking about? There was no boy." "Yes, there was. I followed him to his house back there past the woods. It was super creepy." "Right. You told the cops about some kids you had seen back there, but there wasn't even a house or anything. That's how they found the ditch."
Still here? Aw, look at you. Brave little meatbag. Too late to back out now. Next story's already watching.
Hi, my name is Sarah and I'm new to this whole Reddit thing. I have never really taken the internet or social media seriously and opted to live out my quiet life in the suburbs of Midwestern America, taking care of my mother. To give you the same bleak greeting that all my friends and colleagues have received, the last few weeks have been hell for me. Between losing my mother and my brother, it seems like my whole world is falling apart. I know it sounds cliché, but my brother really was my best friend. Ever since he started working on farms in the Ozarks, I have seen progressively less of him. My mother provided the only purpose in my life for a long time now. In a time where all I am doing is looking for answers, any semblance of comfort is hard to come by. But one single glinting light of hope pierced its way through my veil of grief when I was contacted by the police last week. They told me they had made a new break in the case and I immediately offered to travel to the site of the crash. They said that there was no need and that they could send me the item in the post. I thought it odd that they would simply send a piece of evidence to me in the post, but they assured me that this was more of a personal item. The following is a transcript of the contents of the notebook. I angled the machine to face the sloping headland of the massive field. This would be no easy feat and I would earn every penny of my income on this job. I attached the header and aligned the fixtures of various mechanical connectives. I tested all the moving parts diligently, ensuring to calibrate the height and speed of the rotating blades. Finally, I re-entered the cab and opened the creaking sunroof to ventilate the stale air without resigning myself to an evening of pollen and dust. I revved up the combine and carefully released the clutch, proofing myself forward through the golden rows of barley. A collection of wavering, circular lights began to appear over the jagged mountain peaks. They seemed to be dancing around. It was not a surprise. The lights had become a sort of routine when working beside the mountain. I had spent many tiresome hours agonizing over their possible source. Some sort of optical illusion is what I had settled on for the sake of my insanity. But there was a part of me that always wondered about something supernatural fluttering around those ancient Ozark mountains. I was often distracted by their mesmerizing warmth. Like something familiar to a deep part of myself, detached from any discernible memory or cognitive thought. I let out a labored wheeze caused by the pollen that hung heavy in the air and returned to my work. It was just me and my work now. I had focus. I had a purpose. I had my composure. The first phone call came at 9:15. Suddenly, a transient being dashed across my line of vision. The ethereal figure disrupted the barley, leaving stalks swaying in its wake. I reacted by serving the cumbersome machine to the side, but it was inevitably useless. The figure was gone. It seemed too substantial to be a rabbit and too close to the ground to be a bird. It left too little destruction to be a deer. I shuddered in the warm evening breeze. It must have been a deer. I was tired and drowsy from the hours of driving to this field and unable to carry on. So, I swerved back into the row of barley and reversed to restore the straight line before trundling back to the edge of the field and switching off the engine. I allowed my cheek to decompress as I reclined into the seat. The hazy, orange sunset cast a dark, red glow along the forest floor and I found my exhausted body drifting into a welcome sleep. In an instant, I froze in place with my feet rooted to the soft, pine needles of the forest floor. I was paralyzed by the alien sight of an unmistakable entity. Skulking out of the shadows at the far shore, the beast emerged. It was small and appeared dark red in the waning light. My feet finally began to move and I edged closer to the water. I became so mesmerized by the creature that I disregarded the vibrating phone lodged securely in my pocket. My stiff leather boots entered the water and the figure stepped out into the moonlight, revealing its leathery skin and grotesque, demonic form. It stood on 4 legs and had a raggedy coat as if it was a stray dog. 2 horns protruded from its head and its small, beady eyes looked on with domineering certainty. Its feline face narrowed to squint towards me. There was no question, it was an Ozark howler. My phone ceased its vibrations as the water consumed my legs and waist. The coolness of the pond relieved my aching limbs and urged me forward into the depths to be closer with this divine creature. The howler cocked its head before darting sporadically into the water with vicious intent. The water appeared to become red in color and I marched forward, I was consumed up to my neck. The force of the howler's uncompromising jaw bit forcefully into the flesh of my lower calf and I regained conscious thought. I began threshing frantically in an attempt to dissuade the beast from continuing its voracious attack. It felt its strong body reverberating to my meager flailing and begin to emerge from the grimy depths of the pond. I retreated quickly and left the water as the howler followed, growling and snarling from its frothy mouth. I stumbled over the remnants of the fireplace, rolling my ankle in the process. I struggled to regain my balance as the howler advanced. I eventually stood and, fueled by adrenaline, began to sprint through the desolate foliage of the forest. I ran in a zigzag pattern to avoid the terror that followed behind me, and I was making gradual progress to evade it. However, I was traveling further and further away from the field and the combine and any contact I could make to the outside world in the event of injury. I crashed into an exposed tree root, gnarled to a point, and felt the viscous blood seep out of my neck. The stars circling my head were replaced by the cosmic constellations now visible in the sky. A red human form crept into the corner of my perception and continued briskly into the clearing. Barely visible in the twilight, the translucent being raised a slender bayonet from its heavy coat. I rubbed my eyes raw in a vain attempt to discern the details of the person, but a thick fog had set in and all my tired corneas could manage was a fuzzy rendition of the scene. Suddenly, an army of similar red figures emerged from the darkness, converging towards the lone soldier. They had no weapons, no coats, just pure valor and indignation. As if a choreographed scene from a black and white film, the men advanced towards the soldier with mock reverence. Before they could reach the hopeless soldier, the figure seemed to fade into the black night and disappear fully from sight. I motioned to stand and shakily managed to support myself against the tree. I felt the liquid on the back of my neck and retracted my arm to catch a glimpse of my scarlet hands. Finally, I began to walk forward, placing every foot with arduous stiffness. I glanced optimistically into the trees every few steps, scanning for a reduction in the density that would indicate the presence of the expansive field. As I did, my vision began to blur and the red-tinted plumes of displaced light shone again, and I drifted into another trance. The ominous barn structure stood and was maintained throughout it all. It served as a church, an escape, a haven, a grain store. The long, sturdy timber poles remained strong in spite of the decades. I found a small beaded necklace on the ground. I unearthed it from soft, fertile clay and held it up to the red light. A small gleaming effigy of a suffering Jesus caught the light. I wept at the speed of progress and the digression of moral values. The small metal cross glinted in the morning sunlight as it hung from the mirror above the dash. I rang Tom. He was apologetic and understanding of my predicament. He told me not to worry about the field. But I did worry. I was still tied to this work, this job and this lifestyle. I couldn't mentally leave the place after what I had been through. But that thought quickly vanished as I sped up the sloping roads and raced past the overhanging vegetation. I wept silently for my mother. I had never intended for it to end like this. Misty specks of rain splattered gently onto the windshield. The previous night's event stayed prominent in my memory. I would never shake the thought of those men, building a colonial empire in the Ozark forest. All that stood now was the old barn. The remnants of a dying tradition. The burning embers of the frontier had died out. In all that time, I never blamed the men. I never resented them. They had a job to do just as I had mine. Did we all contribute to something greater? That is not for me to decide. At least I saved part of the harvest before the rain. The car glided along the frictionless surface. That was the first fear I had felt. I briefly but evidently lost control. I steadied my hands on the wheel and tapped on the brakes. The result was a slight drift along the smooth road. I gasped as the rain blurred my vision. I averted my gaze to perceive the sky before closing my eyes and lying motionless. On the inside of my eyelids, I imagined the red workers toiling to construct a road on such a steep slope. The cross dropped down from the mirror and became submerging in my rapidly pooling blood. I cried again and prayed compulsively until I lost consciousness. The last thing I thought of before slipping into that painful slumber was the water of the starlit pond. It was so beautiful in the moonlight. It almost resembled the cracked glass that crumbled down onto my head in the crashed car. /Patrick Kavanagh, The Great Hunger.
Still with us? Good. That last one was just the warm-up. Let's go deeper.
I need to share what I found in my attic last night, by A10A10A10. Related 3. Gloria, I yelled down the stairs. She would be so happy to know I found it. I couldn't wait to see her delight. You wouldn't believe what but then I stopped. I eventually pulled myself together. I held the pendant and put it on. I grasped it as it hung around my neck. It actually made me feel better. The first thing I noticed was that the air tasted ancient. It really had been a long time since anyone had been in there. I shined the flashlight briefly around the room to get my bearings. The next thing I noticed was the gun. A musket specifically. It appeared to be from the Civil War era. And on an old table there was a stack of currency. American $1 bills. The date said 1862, but I didn't recognize the man on it. He was fat and bald. I would have recognized any president of the United States, but this man had certainly never been president. I'd have to look that up later. There was also a stack of Confederate $5 bills. I did recognize the man on those bills. Jefferson Davis. Nothing could have prepared me for what I would see. It was a very old photograph again. The edges had been rotting for decades. It was also black and white and looked like it had been taken in the Civil War era. It was again a portrait of a man. And that man was me. Looking just like I currently do. Wearing the same pants and shirt that I currently am wearing. The same haircut. The same facial hair. He was even wearing the same heart-shaped pendant that I had only ever put on today. But there was nothing out there. I think my mind was just playing tricks on me. I had been spooked though. I decided to leave the attic for the time being. To think about all that's happened.
Sleeping yet? Didn't think so. Next story's up. And yeah, it's worse. You're welcome.
I never got to meet him in person. My dad told me his old man was a strange fellow, but he was talented as I looked down to see his craftsmanship. A solid oak table that he engraved by hand. It had different words that a simple country boy couldn't pronounce, and symbols I had seen nowhere else. The way my dad talked about him before he himself passed, I would have liked him. My friend Eugene always told me I needed to do something about those damn coyotes that keep getting my pets, but I knew the truth. It wasn't those scavengers that kept picking off my dogs. You can smell them, can't you, girl? I asked as I rubbed behind her ear. I stood up from my chair and grabbed my rifle, walking to the edge of the porch to see the tree lean swaying as I could hear May whine behind me. I aimed the sights at the trees in the distance, while waited for those bastards to show themselves. It was a game of patience now. The sound of branches snapping echoed from the distance as I rested my finger on the trigger. Come on out here, boys, this is private property, and I got my Winnie waitin' for ya. I yelled, hoping it was just another pair of dumb teens. They loved to come around at night sometimes. It was a dumb legend around here that my family land is haunted. It started when my grandfather got torn apart in his own damn yard. May began to bark aggressively, and I fired off a shot into the woods. The sound of a painful roar came soon after. I knew then it wasn't any of the dumb boys from town. I cocked my rifle again and gripped it tightly, waiting for them. May, where are ya, girl? I whispered while looking for my canine companion. My eyes scanned every corner as I tried to tread carefully and lightly through my home. The heavy creaks continued as I headed down the hall to the bedroom. That was May's safe place where she would hide. I pushed open the door and paused. I could hear it as the footsteps rushed towards me. I quickly turned around and let another gunshot. As my ears began to ring, I felt something else. The warm feeling of my blood dripping down my arm as my eyes saw the teeth sink into my shoulder. It released me briefly before it overpowered me and pushed my body into the wall. The feeling of my ribs cracking as it pressed onto me tightly. It snarled as I felt its hot breath on my face. The beast screamed in agony as I saw the glimmer of a blade lunge into its back. I buckled as its paws released me and I fell to the ground from the pain of my ribs. The monster wailed again as I could see the knife cut across its chest. "It's about goddamn time you showed up." I coughed. I looked to see a man, one that I had only ever seen in pictures and heard stories about. He stood in between me and the creature as he cut the creature one last time before it had lost its courage and fled. I struggled to stand as he began to walk towards the front room. "They are growing in the numbers," he said. I walked over to the table, pouring another shot of whiskey. My grandfather had worked hard tonight and saved my ass. He deserved another offering.
Whew, telling gave me chills. But hey, we're just getting started. The next one's sharper. You'll see.
My skin crawled as Albert spoke. He filled me with the opposite of the warmth Derek did. The world became cold and hopeless. "Is everyone okay up there?" I asked, desperately hoping that my stunt with the lift hadn't hurt anyone. "Are you some kind of idiot?" Albert retorted, rolling his eyes. "All the chaos this girl has caused and you think I'm going to just let her head back up there to cause more, when she bought such a beautiful gift." He took a few steps towards Ellie, gazing in wonder, and Derek stepped in front of her. "I'm sorry. It's great to meet you, Ellie." He edged a little closer again and got down to void level, just like Derek had not long ago. There was no instant connection this time though, just a twisted fascination in his eyes. He spoke as if she wasn't even there. "Exquisite. She's natural." "Of course she is." Derek responded, stepping back as he continued to guard the little girl. "Nothing you mess with works out very well, does it?" "What are you talking about?" I blurted, confused. I had no idea what they meant by natural or what they were arguing over. In fact, I had personally always found Ellie's demonic appearance quite unnatural myself. Albert scoffed maniacally as Derek looked at the floor. The sibling dynamic was so visible, you could see Derek being put into a place of little brother, trying to hide behind the peak of his flat cap. Regardless, he valiantly continued to shield Ellie. Finally, Albert stood up and addressed me directly again. My mind reeled at his words. Maybe the building really could change its inhabitants. To be honest, I spent more time than I'd like to admit wondering how I hadn't found it easier to escape Prue. I was permanently scarred from the altercation after all. Despite my contempt for Albert, I recognized that what he was saying made sense. He gave that cult the ability to burn the whole floor with their minds, and I gave the residents that died new life as the cats. Since he left to stay down here, he's been messing around with anyone and anything he can get his hands on. I've tried to stop it over the years, but I don't always manage. Those people you dealt with on the floor below the basement, they were all his failed experiments. Those poor people were once residents upstairs that ended up here by mistake. 50 years worth. Albert couldn't let him continue. He was bursting with the need to gloat. I wouldn't say they failed. They're all beautifully grim. I thought you were a fan of giving things new life, little brother. There was little to no feeling in his voice. His sharp tone and dusty suit made him almost like a caricatured amalgamation of every Disney villain recorded. Derek stayed silent. I could see he felt guilty for even being associated. He just looked at me in desperation. I tried to fathom what they were saying. There's that intelligence I liked about you when we first met. It's in there, girl. Now you get it. Can you explain to me where your little friend came from? His words were patronizing, but he couldn't hide his curiosity. Eddie wouldn't like you either, she said bluntly, breaking the magic in his eyes. Derek didn't respond to his brother. Instead, he grabbed Ellie's clawed hand and walked her towards Essie's flat. What are you doing? Albert cried out in a condescending fashion, scrambling up from his knees and following. I couldn't bear to see him get closer. An anger bubbled inside me and the entire floor went dead silent. All noise was replaced by a deep mental echoing of the screams of the mangled people. I thought of all the suffering the landlord had caused and watched as he edged towards that pure, innocent, demonic little girl. And I saw red. I prepared to die. Since moving into the tower block it was something that I'd done more than most, but this time felt permanent. Everything but Albert went black. I squeezed my eyes shut tightly and tried to think of the things I wanted to remember, the people upstairs that had become family to me. She was much taller and wider than usual, a gigantic figure towering above all of us, and her human features that came through the demonic ones were greatly reduced. If I didn't love her so dearly I would be tempted to describe her as terrifying and monstrous. Albert took his attention away from Derek, a smug and slimy smile forming ear to ear as he marveled at the giant girl. He moved towards her in a trance-like state. Ellie opened her mouth as she stood above Albert with her claws, revealing long sharpened teeth with prominent fangs in the front. Somehow her voids for eyes seemed infinitely deeper. Then she bit him. Her sharp fangs pierced Albert's skull, sending blood and brain matter spattering across the corridor and all over me, Essie and Derek. Bone and organ littered the floor and walls and what was left of limbs twitched as she severed nerves. I watched in horror and awe. A symphony of screaming, growling and crunching breaking through my muffled hearing. It felt good. To know that she was safe.
Need a break? Too bad. These stories don't wait, and neither do we. Next one's worse. In the best way.
Borrasca 4, by the Dalek Emperor. It's not over yet, Kyle, I said as he dropped into the seat next to me. I couldn't disagree. The town I'd grown to love seemed so foreign to me now. Whitney hadn't been an outlier like I'd thought. Missing people were the norm here. And that would make Jimmy Prescott the king. He's Satan, himself. As soon as the words were out of my mouth, Kyle punched the car door, awaking from his dead state with rageful vigor. I'll fucking kill Jimmy Prescott. Where is that motherfucker? You know he's involved in all this, Sam, you know Dash. Yeah, and so what, he's recruiting people to be drug mules or something. We drove over to 4th Street Gourmet Coffee and Bakery and went in to buy our usual provisions of Rockstars and Monsters. As I paid for the 4 packs of cans I saw Mira waiting on coffee at the end of the bar. I could tell immediately that she was in a good mood, something that I hadn't seen much of since I'd started working for her. It was probably a good time to tell her I was calling out of work for my 5th day in a row. Sam. Oh my gosh, how are you? My mind blanked. Just as I started to stutter out some bullshit about helping my dad, Kyle appeared behind me. Yes. Owen told me you'd asked him about that. You know that's just a story, Sam, that legend has been around since I was a kid. Thanks. Kyle's voice was sour and I knew his patience was thin. Mira? Why not? Why were you asking her husband about Borrasca anyway? And did he know? Is it what? Is it a thing? I don't know. I've never heard of it. I've googled everything weird about this town but nothing ever came up. Did you spell it right? I don't know, I shrugged. Do you know how to spell it? No. I pulled out my phone. No, fuck Google. Kyle said. We need to talk to Catherine Scanlon. That's what Kimber would say. He was right. Catherine Scanlon may be the most knowledgeable person in town and was probably the right person to ask. I pulled out a 4th Street coffee and prayed she was at her office already. When we parked in front of Drisking Arts and Antiques, I was disappointed to see that the store was dark. Kyle pointed to a small, cheap open sign hanging in the corner of the door, and I crossed my fingers that it was for Catherine's office. I was relieved to find the door unlocked, and we hurried past all the antiquities and blown glass to the back of the store, where we found an open door and Catherine sitting at her desk. Catherine raised her eyebrows. "Color me impressed." Catherine raised her eyebrow. I remember that legend as a kid. I'd actually have to tell you I didn't know if it wasn't for Wyatt. He knew so little about so much, she laughed. A sort of jack of all trades. Anyway, he told me an interesting fact once about Baraska. It's both a mine, I whispered. Well, generally it's only the first mine in the system to run dry that is called a Baraska. Do you know which mine ran dry first? In our mining system? Kyle asked from where he stood near the door, repeatedly clenching and unclenching his fists. Not off the top of my head, no, she laughed. I can look though, I think I have those records here somewhere. Catherine walked behind her desk and opened a drawer of loose files. This is an odd thing to be interested in for boys your age, but I guess I should be glad you two are so eager to learn, especially over the summer. Is the Baraska, the first mine that ran out of ore, was that by chance the same one those kids disappeared in? The McCaskies? Oh, no, I don't think so. That particular mine was the Southwest Mine and was very close to town. I think it was one of the last to close, actually. Here we go. This packet should have that information. Here we go. The first mine to close was the North Central Mine, which was, actually one of the first to open. Catherine pulled over a different stack of papers and started to fumble through it. After the longest minute of my life she made an ha-ha sound and pulled out a large, yellowed piece of paper that had been folded into a standard A4 size. She unfolded it on the desk and leaned over to read the markings. I could see from where I was standing near the doorway that it was a map, and I knew we weren't leaving this office without it. Let's see. That mine was up further on the mountain, a little harder to get to. See? And she pointed at a small dot on the map that was at least 4 miles from where we'd been looking. It's so far from where we've been looking, Kyle stuttered. We need to go there now. And we need to get a gun. A gun? Where are we going to get a gun, Kyle? Fine, then let's scout the place first and then we'll come back with a gun. That didn't seem like a good idea to me either, but what choice did we have? After studying the map for several minutes we realized the easiest way to access the mine was still through the West Rim Prescott Ore Trail. By noon we had been hiking for 4 hours and it seemed to me that we were lost. I tempered the welling panic with thoughts of Kimber and Whitney and the answers to the mystery that had absorbed my life for so many years. Kyle, for his part, said nothing and kept his eyes straight and his mission his priority. And then, just as the sun teetered on the apex of the day, we saw an emptiness through the trees and the hard lines of man-made buildings. Kyle quickened his step and I rushed to keep up. When we finally broke through the tree line I choked on my own deep breath and fell back against a tree as I looked over the quiet encampment. A large, wooden sign post that was almost as long as the entire clearing was still standing near the entrance of the mine. It had to be a century old, and though most of the letters had rotted off over the years, from those remaining I could guess that it had once said, Drisking Underground Mine. What was left, however, was, Skin ND Min. Skinned men. We stepped out from the shadows and into the vulnerability of the clearing. There were several large buildings still standing and the boarded-up entrance to the ore mine was set back in the mountain. "Let's try that building," he said, and pointed toward the one nearby, which was the largest and at least 2 stories tall. We counted to 3 and then ran across the camp to the large wooden doors of the old building. They were cracked open, and when we squeezed inside I had no doubts that death was indeed present in Baraska. We were standing in what I guessed was a refinery, and in the middle of the room was a large silver, conically shaped machine. A conveyor belt fed into it, and the room had a sour smell. Even the dirt beneath our feet seemed to have taken on a crimson tint. "This is the machine. This is where they take them," I said. "This is the place where people die." I was only too happy to squeeze back out the door of the building and tiptoe around the side. We rounded a corner and almost ran into a recently waxed, shiny, green truck parked there. "This is Jimmy Prescott's truck," I breathed. We were now on extraordinarily high alert. Kyle dropped to the ground and began to commando crawl around the building. I followed him, waiting to hear a shout or a gunshot, but none came. Many seemed to be bloated, and I waited for one to call out to me, but they all remained silent, some watching me through tired, dead eyes and others turning away. Looking around I realized they were all women, and the bloating I saw seemed to be pregnancies. Some were confined to their beds and others were not. It was Jimmy, something I'd been expecting to see, but the scene before me was not. He was hunched over the bed of an almost unrecognizable, unresponsive Christy, treating her like an animal. She watched me through the slits of her dead eyes, but she didn't call to me for help. I thought I saw a tear run down her cheek before she turned her face away from me to face the wall on the other side. "What the fuck?" I didn't even realize the words were audible. I had never seen this depth of human suffering. Jimmy's head snapped around to look at me and briefly registered surprise before he smiled at me in a way that turned my insides to ice. He didn't stop what he was doing, and I wanted nothing more than to run over and push him off of Christy, but to my utter shame I couldn't force myself to come any further into the room. "Back here, hurry, please," I found Kimber. "Help us. Please." There were maybe only a handful of girls yelling at me, but it sounded thunderously loud as it filtered through my guilt. The weight of their misery dropped down upon me, and it almost pushed me into the ground. "I will. I'll get help, I'll help you," I promised them as I followed Kyle's voice, still screaming desperately, from an adjacent room. I sprinted across another threshold and saw him, hunched down near a corner bed, helplessly yanking on a leather strap attached to it. "I'll fucking kill you, Prescott, you sick cunt. I'll fucking stomp all your bones and bleed you out, you little motherfucker." Kyle had lost all reason and strategy. He was filled with rage instead of fear, and it scared me even more. I pulled Kimber's wrist from the final strap and yelled, "Go now." "I can't." I turned toward him as tears ran down my hot cheeks, and Kyle saw her too. I can't stay," Kyle said, still moving toward the door. "I have to get Kimber away from here. Please," but he knew I wasn't going anywhere now. "Good luck, bro," I said, and then we were both running in different directions. Whitney's hair was long, but it was thin, as was her face. Everything on her looked brittle except for her stomach, which bubbled out from her like an overblown balloon. She refused to look at me and flinched at my touch as I tried desperately to unbuckle her from the bed. I hadn't even finished the first belt when I heard Jimmy walk up behind me. I didn't bother to look at him or stop trying to free my sister. I didn't know what else to do. "There's no sense in any of this." My voice sounded frail and it cracked over the last word. "Horses." Nothing made sense. "Yep." Jimmy slapped the bed next to him. "We call these buildings the stables," he laughed. I dropped the last buckle on the floor and looked down at Whitney. I expected her to spring up and run toward the door while I went after Prescott, but all she did was rub her wrists and itch her collarbone. Then she put her arms back where they'd been, turned her head away from me and shut her eyes. I slumped down onto the bed next to her and picked up her cold hand. If she wasn't leaving here, neither was I. It was over. I sent a silent prayer up to a God I didn't know and wished my friend's safety. "Do you want to know what this is, Sam?" I shrugged. It didn't seem to matter now. I couldn't take it anymore. I didn't want to be here, listening to this. I didn't want to see Whitney so broken, and I didn't want to wait for inevitable death. It was torture in its purest form. Jimmy laughed loudly as if it was funniest thing he'd ever heard. "Kill you? Christ, kid, if I could then I already would have, but I'm not allowed to kill you. I've been trying to decide if I want to fuck your sister right in front of you though. She's not one of mine, but it might be worth it just to see your face. Just kill me and let her go." "Fuck, I'll kill myself if you let her go." I stood up from the bed and Jimmy took 2 steps toward me and punched me so hard in the face that I fell back down on it. I moaned as I fought the tears and stars behind my eyes. "I can't let her go, you little fuck. She's got one of our community services babies in her. Grace says she's got another week to go, 2 tops." Jimmy looked down at Whitney and frowned. "She's been puttin' out shit babies, though, and as soon as this one's out of her she's got a date with the shiny gentleman. I gotta take a business call. 2 minutes and we can get back to our conversation." Jimmy walked over to a corner of the room and I desperately started to pull on Whitney. My head whipped toward the door as I heard a truck skid in the dirt just outside of it. Jimmy ended his phone call and Killian Clary walked in, pushing a limping, bloody Kyle in front of him. "Lose something, Prescott." "God damn it, Clary, you fucked us. Go back out there and find that girl." Jimmy snatched his gun off the bed and shoved it into the back of his waistband. "I gotta do your fucking job now." Jimmy walked over and without any hesitation kicked Kyle so hard in the ribs I heard some of them snap inside his chest. I tried to stand up but I was still dizzy and fighting off the darkness. "Where's your girlfriend, Landy?" Prescott raised his boot and then stomped down hard on Kyle's ankle. He screamed in pain. "I can do this all day, kid." Clary sat down on a bed across the aisle and lit a cigarette, watching him passively. Jimmy pulled Kyle to his feet and then punched him hard in face. A few of Kyle's teeth scattered across the floor. "Tell me, you little cunt." Jimmy punched him again in the face and Kyle went limp. Jimmy had straddled Kyle by now and was rapidly punching him in the face and chest. Kyle was barely conscious and I prayed he'd pass out from the pain. After a full minute of this Jimmy stood up and rubbed his bloodied fists. "Last chance, Landy." "Fuck you," Kyle said through a wheezing, rattled breath of air. Jimmy spit on him and raised his foot up as high as he could and brought it down on Kyle's face with so much force that I heard his skull break. I sagged in Killian Clary's arms and he dropped me into a puddle at his feet. Jimmy bummed a cigarette off Clary and they stood next to Whitney's bed, watching me cry. Jesus, what a mess. I couldn't have heard him right. "Fuck that little Landy shit ain't leaving here." I stood up and my knees didn't buckle beneath me. "I'm not leaving without my sister," I told them. Jimmy laughed. "Yes, you are," Clary said. "If you want to save your friend's life. He ain't dead yet, Sam, but he will be soon." He tossed his keys at me. "The road off this mountain is back by the refinery." I opened the door to Clary's old Ford and placed Kyle in the front seat, wincing as his head rolled around like a ball on a string. It took me almost an hour to get down the mountain, even though I took the overgrown road at ridiculous speeds and did everything I could to destroy the shocks on the truck. I sped into the hospital's emergency zone and found a medical team waiting inside the door. It was clear that they'd gotten a call to expect me because they already had a crash cart with them and N4 ready to push into Kyle's wrist. Is anyone going to file a police report? Does anyone even fucking care what happened? We're not going to tell your mother. Alright? She has enough to worry about. Yes, you arrived at the hospital in Killian's truck. We already talked to them both. Samuel, we will never speak of this again. Do you understand? Enough. If you want this to go away, you will keep your mouth shut about it, make no statements to anyone, and I'll hire the best lawyer I can afford to clean up your mess. I don't know why you beat your best friend almost to death, and frankly I don't want to. You dash. Since everyone in town thought I was a violent thug, no one would let me stay with them when I called around. I eventually went to a motel far outside of town and drained the last of my savings from work paying for the room. I stayed in Drisking long after the money had run out and I was sleeping on the concrete behind the motel. I stayed until Kyle was released from the hospital, a mute, empty-eyed, soulless vegetable. I went to see him once, while only Parker was home, and threatened him until he let me inside the house. When I had assured myself that the Kyle I knew was dead and only his empty husk remained, I left his house and hitchhiked out of town. And after I spent 4 drunken, drug-fueled years in Chicago, I came home one day to find a letter waiting for me. It didn't have a return address, but it was postmarked California. I know you aren't going to understand why we did the things we did. It was all born out of love, at least it started that way. You're everything to me and you'll always be my daughter. Do you understand? And I'm leaving this world because of what I've done to you, not because of what you are. I don't want you to be upset about what you are. Because who you are is beautiful. My dearest, this town has done horrible things. And all of us who live here are guilty. Read this letter and leave this place. I need to tell you all of this. I need to start at the beginning. Somewhere along the way, decades ago, the major population of Drisking became unable to bear children. Most people blame the town for letting the iron ore leak into our water table during the collapsing of our mines. And the town came under the care of Thomas Prescott when he started to sell some of the babies on the side for a profit to rich couples. And the sheriff, he helped him do this. But then an ugly rumor started that they were selling to human traffickers. And the Prescotts had to offer triple the price for girls. And in town, we began to murmur. But we once again turned the other cheek when the city was suddenly flooded with money because of how well the traffickers paid. People had well-paying jobs again and were proud to call Drisking home. So we said nothing, and those that did were taken to the mountain. Because that is where they do it. There is a place on the mountain where the women are taken, kimber, drifters, runaways, and, if their parents choose it, sometimes the girls in town are even sold back. They arrange to sell the girls and they meet them at a tree halfway between our town and their baby mill. Sometimes kids play there now. I think you played there. Please get out of Drisking before your father finds this letter. Run away and never come back and never speak of it to anyone. Their industry has deep roots now and the traffickers have lofty connections. Don't tell anyone. Don't keep this letter. Don't look back. CK.
Anyway, let's lighten the mood with something fun and... Nah, just kidding. It gets worse. Hit it.
A few nights ago, I got a call at about 11:30 p.m. I don't usually work overnight, but one of my coworkers was out sick, so I volunteered for a double shift, as my boss would pay me overtime if I did so. I'm just sitting at my desk, daydreaming about whatever, when I get the call. I brace myself and answer. This is what was said. I was caught completely off guard by the caller screaming into the phone and immediately put on edge. The caller was a man, as I could tell by the deepness in the voice. I knew already this was not routine, and I immediately tried to calm him down so I could find out where he was and send police/fire/EMTs to his location. Me, police are on their way. Are you hurt? Through the phone, I could now hear the muffled screams of a girl. It was now apparent that the intruder was inside the house. Caller, no. I was alone before she broke in. Me, okay, I need you to listen to me carefully. Lock yourself inside a room and hide. Stay on the line with me. Caller, I'm already locked inside the bedroom and hiding under the bed. Me, is she near your room? Caller, no, I don't think so. Caller, oh God, she's now pounding on the door. Me, they are on their way. They will be there soon. Caller, yeah, I can try to. Already, I was panicking for the caller. I couldn't have imagined how frightening the whole situation would be. But the description the caller then gave me was bone-chilling. I was becoming more and more horrified the more he described her. This was no longer your typical burglar. No little girl breaks into homes in the middle of the night with intent to kill. This little girl didn't even sound human, not by how the caller was describing her. Caller, well, now that you mentioned it, this isn't my house. He didn't even get to finish what he was going to say. As soon as he spoke, I heard a massive crash and the man yelled. I heard the ear-splitting screams of the man and the intruder. Then the line went dead. I sat at my desk, frozen and silent for a good few minutes. I then broke down, and one of my fellow dispatchers, who had heard my conversation while sitting at his desk, immediately came over and comforted me. I told him what had just happened, and his face went white as snow. He was horrified. He must be thankful, however, that he didn't have to hear it firsthand. The bedroom door was blown off its hinges. The door was in pieces, and there were wooden shards everywhere. If the cops weren't already creeped out at this point, they were just beginning to be. My friend told me that a linebacker couldn't have caused that much damage to the door in one blow, let alone a little girl. She was already on edge, but it got much, much worse when they eventually found the caller. The man was found in the bathroom connected to the bedroom he was hiding in. It was gruesome. His blood was everywhere, most of it flowing from a gaping hole in his abdominal region. Some of it, however, was on the walls of the bedroom and the ceiling. His eyes were also missing. My friend said a couple of police officers passed out or vomited from sheer shock after looking at the grisly atrocity that happened to the man. I was already horrified by what I had heard. The man had died a very violent death, and this intruder was still out there. But my friend then told me something that made this case more bone-chilling than it already was. While looking around the house, one of the officers found an out-of-place wall near the kitchen. The wall looked to be artificial. It was connected to another wall, but it was only about 4 feet high and seemed to serve no purpose. It almost looked like a barrier to the kitchen, though there was an opening right next to it. He called for the other officers to come over to him ASAP, and they broke through the rest of the wall. They inspected the blanket, and one of the officers lightly brushed the blanket off the lump. What they found was almost as disturbing as the dead caller. It was the dead body of a young girl. A few days later, the rest of the details came out about this case. I was eager to hear what the coroner and police had discovered, and my friend called me to tell me the rest of the story as soon as she found out. The caller had died from, and this was the exact term my friend used, blood loss from being gutted. His eyes were never found. The girl was identified as Taylor Watherton, a 9-year-old girl who went missing a little over 2 years ago. She went missing from a local playground, and she was last seen wearing a polka-dot covered skirt. I didn't think much of it until I found a missing persons poster with her picture on it. She was a cute, petite girl, with black hair that ran just to her shoulders. As I was looking at her photo, I couldn't stop thinking about that skirt she was last seen in. I felt like I was missing something. And then it hit me, and I almost fainted as I remembered what the caller told me. I told my friend when I originally talked to her that the caller said the house wasn't his. She did some digging and reported back to me around the same time the rest of the details were released. The house belonged to a man named Travis Quinsley, who had recently been reported missing. He had apparently told his family he was going on a trip to Canada, as he had a few friends who lived up there and that they were going to have a guy week. However, he didn't return when he was supposed to. During this time, his family would rotate house sitting. His brother, Colby, was the caller. I knew what he had looked like. His photo had been shown on the news a couple of times since his body was identified alongside a missing child. He was a young man, with straight strawberry blonde hair and a decent build. My heart dropped when I looked at a picture of him together with his brother on one of his social media accounts. It was captioned, "Back with the twin." He looked exactly like Colby.
That last one tasted like fear and poor decisions. Let's see what the next bite stirs. Hope you're hungry.
I shouldn't have done it. I know I shouldn't have done it. But the thing is, Matthew's more than just a son to me. The kid's one of my best friends. It's been like that ever since his mum passed away. Lately, though, ever since he came back from university a couple of weeks ago, in fact, I've been worried about him. Really worried. He didn't look like he was going to meet mates, though. He looked like he was off to face a firing squad. Anyway, I know all this doesn't excuse what I've done. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that when I went into Matthew's room after he'd left this morning, and I saw that his laptop was open, well, I only planned to take a quick look. Just something to set my mind at rest. Matthew's room is at the back of the house, overlooking the garden. As I sat down at his desk, a soft patch of morning sunlight spilled in through the curtains. Lit the whole room up. It should have been pleasant, but it wasn't. It only highlighted what a mess the place was. Clothes strewn over the floor. Dirty mugs. Textbooks and paper spilling everywhere. The top left corner of Matthew's desk was covered in soil, which had spilled from the pot plant his grandmother gave him. And there was a funny smell in the room, too. An unpleasant mixture of laundry detergent, I'd washed Matthew's clothes for him, old food, and something else. Something I couldn't quite place. The searches from this morning were Google, Twitter and Outlook, and I skimmed straight by those without reading them. I don't really know what I was looking for, exactly, but I guess I'm a visual person. Rather than reading the text, my eyes were scanning the website favicons as I scrolled down. The history wasn't too extensive, and I was already a few days back in time when something made me pause. A collection of darker logos that stood out among the rest. Porn. Quite a bit of it, too. From the looks of it, Matthew had spent that particular night browsing the stuff for at least a few hours. I stared at the logos and scratched the back of my neck. My skin suddenly felt hot. The light coming in from the curtains was making me squint. Either way, I suddenly found myself staring at a collection of Google searches my son had made the day before yesterday. Ones I'd missed before. And as I read through them, I felt a worm of unease stir in my stomach. And number X200B. Or at least that's the story I told myself before I scrolled to Matthew's most recent searches. The ones he made this morning. The same ones I'd scrolled past at first without reading them properly. Now I read them, though. Now I looked closely at the text for each one. Followed the links, too. Aside from some visits to Outlook, there were only 3 other items in Matthew's history from this morning. And by the time I'd finished looking at them, I felt dread in my stomach that was worse than anything I've ever felt before in my life. Even worse than the dread I felt when Matthew's mum got diagnosed. The photo showed a little girl. Young, maybe around 7 or 8. Big, gap-toothed grin. Blonde hair in a ponytail. Something in my chest tightened. My eyes flicked back to the text above the image. The girl had been gone since yesterday evening, apparently. She'd been out to play in the garden, and hadn't come back. She only lived a few streets away from us. It didn't take me long to find it. I fumbled my left hand into the top of the pot, digging through the dirt, and after a second of searching my fingertips brushed something that shouldn't have been there. A small plastic bag. Buried just enough so the top was covered. I fished it out. I wish I hadn't. I wish, more than anything, that I'd never gone into Matthew's room in the first place. That I'd never looked on his computer.
And now, as the hour gets cold, and the shadows stretch long into the corners of your room, it's time.
Yeah. Chew the spooky violin. But seriously, this next one? Even I didn't sleep after hearing it.
I've seen something coming from you.
What? Just because I sleep in a coffin and collect cursed dolls?
Among other things. This is the final descent for the night. One last story, dragged up from the depths of the disturbed and deranged.
Go ahead. Turn off the lights. We dare you.
This is Horror Slop.
I never fully embraced these beliefs, but I still acted according to them. There were just too many things off about the woods for the tribe to be nothing but an old legend. The fact that everyone was utterly convinced the tribe was real in itself was cause for concern. I'd never heard of anybody venturing into the forest, not even to prove the saying wrong. There was nobody working there either, despite the area being so huge. If the woods were normal, chances are there'd be foresters and woodcutters or maybe even hunters in there. That's what I figured. "Hello," I gasped. He lifted his glass to me with a lazy smile of greeting but didn't say anything. "I need to go into the woods." My dog ran off. He gave me a nod as if to tell me to say no more. He went straight to business. "First off, go in there by yourself. They don't take kindly to groups and noise. And be respectful to those you meet inside." He lowered his head slightly. "You know, they don't refrain from leaving those woods because they don't want to. The woods are big. Easy to get lost in. There's a single path through. It leads into the woods and it'll lead you back out. You're safe there. Follow it and you won't get lost." Duncan gave me a few seconds to let everything sink in before continuing once more. "You don't want to give anyone in there your real name. Names are taboo. Knowing your name will give them power over you, to be used in our world." His wording was ominously cryptic. "What do you mean by that?" I asked. "It means you won't be able to get rid of them." He sighed. "Never mind, just don't let it come to that. Make up a nickname or something and expect them to do the same. They're very careful with that kind of thing. That's easy enough to remember, I'd say. You'll eventually come across the people in there and you're gonna have to talk to them. There's no way around it. I don't want to scare you, but the further you proceed into those woods, the crazier the ones you're gonna meet will be." There was a strong sense of unease within me all of a sudden. I was barely 2 steps past the tree line and already I felt like I was in a whole other world. Maybe it was all the expectation, the anxiety built by Duncan's instructions, but when I turned to glance behind me, back outside, it looked so far away. Slightly startled, I glanced around frantically only to find the source just a few meters ahead of me. It was a man. His back was turned to me and he was facing the tree in front of him. He probably hadn't noticed me yet, so I turned to look away and nervously cleared my throat. "Don't talk fancy with me, it makes me want to puke." "I do though." "So?" "I'm looking for my dog. She's white with black speckles, pretty big." I held my hand up to my hip to indicate her height. "I haven't seen her," he replied. "And pets don't run in here for no reason." "What do you mean?" "Don't come any closer," I told her in the most commanding voice I could muster. I reached into my pocket, fumbling for the small can of pepper spray. I had no idea if I'd be able to defend myself with it at all, but I figured it'd be better than nothing. "Please," I said. "I'm not here to hurt you." The old woman extended her hand to touch my face. Her nails were long, sharp and cracked, they looked almost like claws. I didn't dare to move when she ran them through my hair. Her dull eyes staring into mine, I held my breath. What was I supposed to do? Shove her away? I didn't want to risk provoking her. Then, suddenly, she grasped for my throat. I was just fast enough to duck and avoid her twisted, bony fingers. I dashed forward and took off running. My feet drumming on the soft dirt ground, I blindly raced ahead. I felt the can of pepper spray fall out of my open pocket, but I didn't stop to pick it up. Risking a glance over my shoulder, I saw her lumbering after me. She was not very fast though, and I noticed she never once set foot on the path. It was like she needed to stay off it for some reason. Still, that didn't mean she couldn't hurt me. There was a low thud behind me. I staggered to a halt and turned to find that the old woman was lying on the ground, next to her a small rock. It must have hit her on the head, it had obviously caused her to tumble. Despite that, she was already pulling herself back up, and I took off down the trail again. At least this would help me lose her. I kept running until my sides were burning with pain and the sweat from my forehead was dripping down my neck. It was only when I was absolutely sure she wasn't behind me anymore that I finally slowed down. I dropped to my knees. My throat was sore and dry. Taking deep breaths, I sucked in the cool fresh air. I was quietly muttering phrases of reassurance to myself, mixed with the occasional swear word. Suddenly, I heard someone clear their throat. I spun around only to find the man in the white shirt from before standing behind me. He looked rather pleased with himself. "Thank you so much, He silenced me with a dismissive wave of his hand, but he was smiling still. "I bet she's more like what you were expecting to see here." He laughed and shook his head. "Look, I don't really get why you're chasing after that mutt, but for what it's worth, I'm sure it's gonna be interesting to watch. If you'll allow it, I'd like to come along. That'd be mutually beneficial, right? I'm not saying I'll carry you around or anything, but I'd make myself useful, help you out a bit." He drew out his words, leaving them to linger in the air. I didn't need to think about the offer very long. "Yes, please." He allowed his smile to widen, looking excited as he wiped his hands on his pants. "This should be fun." About that. I overheard two kids walk along the tree line talking a while ago. One was telling this story about someone named Tam Lin. "It's too long to tell you all about it." He almost sounded embarrassed. "But I liked the story, so that's what I'd like for you to call me. Tam Lin." Tam Lin saved me the effort of making up a name of my own, seeing as he simply began calling me Janet. I had little say in it, but I figured complaining wouldn't help. Who was that woman? What did she want? I eventually asked him. We had been walking for a while, me on the path and him beside it. "Right, the path. Why don't you walk on it?" "Because your people put it there," he replied, seemingly thinking this a valid explanation. "It's not our ground to tread on." Tam wasn't uncommunicative. He asked me a lot of things about myself, my everyday life and even my dog. I tried to tell him as much as I could without giving anything away that I shouldn't. He didn't like talking about the woods though, and I suspected he was tired of the topic. It would turn out he was quite the skilled guide. Sometimes, we'd hear odd noises ahead, like shouting or chanting, and he'd make us stay in place until they'd faded into the distance. He could sense when there was somebody ahead we needed to be wary of and told me when it was safe to call for Chips and when to stay silent. Tam himself would occasionally stray from my side and go deeper into the woods in search of the dog so I wouldn't have to leave the path. I watched the sun set through the canopy of leaves above. We hadn't come across anyone else and there was no trace of Chips. I was tired and my feet were starting to hurt. I couldn't believe that the woods were too big to comb through in an entire day. I had never imagined them to be this huge. I thought about calling my parents, but, not wanting to worry them, I decided against it. I lived next door to them, in a much tinier house that also belonged to us. They wouldn't notice my absence for the time being. The forest floor was soft, but still quite unpleasant to sleep on. Tam was obviously completely unfazed by the prospect of resting on the bare ground, but he didn't give me grief for being squeamish. The uncomfort was one thing, but what was worse was that I felt utterly exposed. I spent the night wide awake, restless and afraid. Nothing happened though. When Tam woke up, it was still dark. There was no reason to keep lying around, so we moved on. I saw the sun rise overhead. We kept calling out for Chips but still came up with nothing. Remembering what Duncan had said about the more dangerous inhabitants of the woods living further in the back, I asked Tam if it was true. "I guess," he replied curtly. It made me think. I wasn't feeling well and there was no trace of Chips. The further we'd go in, the more threats there'd be on the way. Was my dog even alive anymore? Maybe, I thought, just maybe it'd be better for me to simply go back. Soon enough, I spotted 4 figures appearing from behind a bunch of hedges. Noticing they were drawing closer, I staggered to my feet. It looked to be 3 women and a man, all of them dressed in rags rather than actual clothing. Carefully staying beside the trail, they slowly walked up to me. The one that came closest first was one of the women. She was tall, almost unnaturally so, her hair was tousled and reached all the way down to her hip. Her face was covered in a mix of scars and slowly healing open wounds, as though something or someone had scratched and cut it up. The skin around the cuts was frayed and dirty. "Hello." "To get water," I muttered. "So he's from the woods?" "Let go of me," I growled, suppressing the fear in my voice as I struggled and eventually managed to tear out of her grasp, her nails leaving painful marks on my skin. I couldn't get back on the path in time though, as the man from the group had moved in front of me, blocking it off. I stumbled away from him and the tall lady while the other 2 quickly stepped over the trail to join us on our side. What followed was an awkward display. The woman staggered to her feet as we stood and stared. The pack looked back at us in stunned silence. They were first to turn and leave though, and it was only when we couldn't see them anymore that I dared to turn and face Tam Lin. "You left the path," he said, sounding soberly astounded rather than angry. I couldn't speak, my throat sore from all the screaming. Still close to tears, I nodded quietly. Tam swallowed. He looked uneasy, but managed to give me a smile. "It's okay, we'll find it again. We need to get you water first anyways. I found the creek, it's just a little bit ahead. Let's go there first and then we'll look for the trail." I nodded again, following him once more as he led me through the trampled down bushes he'd emerged from. The creek was nice and clear, completely undisturbed in its route through the forest. I didn't bother looking for any sort of cup, I simply dropped to my knees and began to shovel the water into my mouth with both hands. Before long, I dipped my head into it, greedily sucking it up as Tam stood and watched. Once I was full, I let out a deep, content sigh and plopped down in the tall grass. I had forgotten how thirsty I'd been this whole time. We stayed for only a few minutes before making our way back to the path. And that's when disaster struck. It took me a long time to accept my fate. I cried for 2 entire days. Tam Lin tried to console me, but despite his good intentions, he failed. I'd never see my parents again. I'd never find myself in the comforts of my home. After these 2 days, however, things changed. I grew melancholy, then oddly content. The woods have an eerily soothing effect on those that it captures. That's the only way I can explain it. I kept looking for Chips, hoping to at least reunite with her one day. We asked everyone we met on our journeys through these endless woods. That's another weird thing, it didn't feel like I was an outsider anymore. The tribespeople, however bizarre and intimidating they'd seem, would treat me as one of their own. I wasn't being hunted anymore. I got used to sleeping on the cold ground, I even began to appreciate it. Whenever I'd rest my head on it, I felt as though I was listening to the earth's heartbeat. Tam Lin and I would sleep side by side like we had during my first night here. Then we moved closer to one another. Then even closer still. I became accustomed to the warmth of his breath on my neck. It was a soft, comforting feeling, him holding my hand and pressing his cheek to mine. One day, he uttered his true name to me and I told him my own. I would rarely feel hunger or thirst anymore, and on the few occasions that I did, the woods would feed me. I think I must have forgotten why I'd gone down that path in the first place. I forgot who I was and what life outside had been like. I even forgot about Chips. I kept on counting the days though, even though I'd forgotten why. 988. That's how many sunrises passed until the day I woke up to barking. I hadn't heard any sounds like it in so long I couldn't even place it at first. My eyes adjusting to the bright sunlight, I could make out something large and dark right above me. When it came down to touch my face, I found it to be wet and warm. A snout. By the time a large, pink tongue came out of it and started to lick the length of my cheek, I was certain. And then it all came back to me. It was my sweet, giant puppy. Her collar was still around her neck, the leash attached to it dirty and caked with mud as it had been dragging behind her all this time. Chips led us through the tall grass and hedges in a weird, bendy route that made me wonder where we were going to end up. We wandered around for almost an entire day before finding ourselves in a spot that looked faintly familiar to me. It's hard to remember details of a place where there is nothing but greenery, but I knew I'd been there before. And then I saw it. The narrow little dirt path. I was too stunned to say a word. Tam tilted his head at me. You don't have to look so shocked. It was you who told me your name. That meant a lot to me, it still does. Knowing the name of one of your people, it makes us special. It means we can tread on your ground, that we can leave. Not my original goal. I just wanted your company. Before all this, I'd see you every time you walked by the woods with that dog. I was always watching, and I kept wondering what you were like. I made up my little plan and it worked, as you can see. He let out a soft chuckle. I told you some of us are lonely, so I wasn't completely dishonest with you. I even said that pets don't run off there for no reason. It took me a little while to regain my ability to speak. You can't be serious. I figured this would come as a surprise. I was never obvious about it. That's why I didn't come along with you right away either. He gave me an almost sad smile. Honestly, I feel bad about it, I really do. I know how much you wanted to go home. I was never going to use force to keep you in there, I just kept leading you away from the path once I got the chance. I messed with your head a little, didn't let you see your way home. But it was the woods' influence too. You said you could check the date on your phone. We're outside, it'll work now. Check. I reached into my pocket, fumbling for my cell phone only to find that I could actually turn it on. It was extremely low on battery, but it worked. A look at the date told me that exactly 3 days had passed since I'd last looked at it. That's impossible, I breathed. How? I counted the days. That's not my doing. It's the woods. They can make you think a few hours are months and that a week is an eternity. Humans come and go, and all experience that effect. My head swam and there was an odd ringing in my ears. I felt like I was going to pass out. And you're letting me go? It was difficult finding and forming those words, but I forced them through my trembling lips nonetheless. 10.
And there you have it, dear listeners. One final scream, echoing into the void.
Yeah. Void screams, eternal darkness, I get it. Can I eat now?
We're still on air, Roxy.
Oh no, just the spooky FCC is gonna haunt us for breaking the mood.
If you enjoyed tonight's descent into depravity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and what does he always say?
Stab that bell icon like it's your ex possessed by a demon, and leave a comment telling us what story made you question. I have choices.
And if you survive the night, we'll be waiting.
Same dat time, same that crypt.
You're the reason we have complaints, you know that.
You're welcome.